me and videos of me. These are what they're not my favorite.
You're good to go. Thank you.
It's daunting to see all the slides in one deck and see that there's 124 slides.
Our audio will be live any second now.
Dick Garwin would have something to say about that.
Welcome to the Census Scientific Advisory Committee 2022 Fall Meeting. Today's conference is being recorded. If you do not consent, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the conference over to Tommy Wright, the Designated Federal Officer for CSAC. Thank you. You may begin.
Tommy Wright. Thank you very much, Helen. Please note that I stated my name before speaking, and I'm going to ask that everyone do the same for the recording. I'm coming to you from, I'm going to follow a tradition by Jay Bright, the committee chair, who asked people, where are you coming from? So I'm coming to you this morning from sunny Bethesda, Maryland, which is a short distance as the bird flies from the Census Bureau. I'm very happy now because my seeds that I planted are beginning to germinate. This is, I understand, the best time of the year to do that. So we'll see if they continue to grow. Good morning and welcome to the 2022 Fall Virtual Meeting of the Census Bureau Scientific Advisory Committee. We're happy and gratified to have committee members and others join us, and we look forward to a productive discussion over the next 2 days. As Helen mentioned, I am the designated federal officer for this committee. In this role, I am required to preside over the advisory committee meeting as specified by the Federal Advisory Committee Act, also known as FACA. The proceedings are being displayed at the YouTube links found on the committee website. The link for closed captioning service is also displayed on the committee meeting page. During this 2-day meeting, only committee members are permitted to ask questions or make comments of Census Bureau presenters and panelists. Committee members, we ask that you keep your lines muted during this meeting unless you're called upon to speak. However, to help facilitate the periods when we have committee discussions, members are asked to unmute their lines and keep them open to allow a more efficient and free-flowing discussion. Please keep background noise to a minimum. After the committee discussion, please mute yourselves again. The video function is available during this meeting, and please feel free to use it while being introduced, presenting, and during committee discussions. If you would like to ask a question or have a comment, please unmute your lines, announce yourselves, and begin your questions and or comments. Please mute yourselves again. As I mentioned, because this meeting is being recorded for transcripts, we ask that you clearly state your name for the record each time you speak. Jay Bright, the committee chair, will also be responsible for facilitating and leading the committee discussions during the meeting. The public comment of the meeting will be held tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. During that time, I will verbally provide public comments that were submitted in writing. For anyone wishing to submit public comments after the meeting, see the Federal Register notice located on the committee website for instructions. All meeting materials and written public comments are posted on the committee website for public viewing. The final recommendations will be posted on the committee website for public viewing after approval. At this time, I would like to acknowledge our Census Bureau leaders. We have Bob Santos, the director, Ron Jarman, deputy director, David Zaire, chief of the Office of Program Performance and Stakeholder Integration, Laura Figioni, Chief Administrative Officer, Louis Cano, Chief Information Officer, James Christie, Acting Chief Financial Officer, Jesus Katag, Associate Director for Communications, Tim, Associate Director for Field Operations, Nick Orsini, Associate Director for Economic Programs, Al Fontenot, Jr., Associate Director for Decennial Census Programs, Victoria Velkoff, Associate Director for Demographic Programs, and John Abald, Associate Director for Research and Methodology. I believe most, if not all, are joining us today. We would also like to thank all members of the public, Department of Commerce staff, congressional staff members, and regional staff who are proceedings. Our meeting agenda reflects a broad range of topics, as always, in response to Census Bureau's needs to share and introduce research and program developments. Also includes topics the committee has recommended on critical program areas and research. Topic sessions are broken into 3 parts. First, there will be presentations by Census Bureau staff members, followed by a discussant who is a member of the committee, and then the full committee will be open for discussion. First on today's agenda, our committee chair, Jay Bright, will share remarks and introduce committee members. Following Jay, the director of the Census Bureau, Robert Santos, and the deputy director of the Census Bureau, Ron Jarman, will provide executive remarks followed by committee discussion. Afterwards, Jason Devine, Matthew Spence, Alexandra Krause, Michael Halls, Nicholas Jones, Rachel Marks, and Mark Mathis. This is a power-packed, information-packed session. We'll present update on the 2020 census data products, followed by discussant John Chika and committee discussion. We'll then have a 10-minute break. After the break, Eloise Parker, Gary Benedetto, and Kara Lentz will present Improving Disclosure Protections on the Current Population Survey Public Use File, followed by a discussion by Claire Boyne, and that followed by committee discussion. We'll stop briefly for another 10-minute break. At that time, we will end today's proceedings. The committee members will congregate amongst themselves to discuss and formulate recommendations with Jay Bright's leadership. Now I'm going to refer to Jay Bright for his opening remarks and introduction of committee members.
Thank you, Tommy. This is Jay Bright, Chair of CSAC. Welcome to the Fall 2022 CSAC meeting. On behalf of the committee, I want to thank the Census Advisory Committee staff for putting together yet another remote meeting. CSAC works most closely with Helen Abraham and Shauna Banks. We'd particularly like to thank them, as well as all the other staff, for their work behind the scenes to get this meeting up and running. As a reminder, the purpose of CSAC, according to our charter, is to provide scientific and technical advice to Director Santos on the full suite of census programs and activities. We're going to see quite a range of those programs and activities during this meeting. Thanks very much to the Bureau's subject matter experts for providing their materials in advance. We're really looking forward to getting into the presentations and discussions. So also, according to our charter, we can have up to 21 members of CSAC. And those of you who have been involved with CSAC in recent years probably know that we reached quite a low ebb. So thank you very much to the Bureau for bringing us back to essentially full strength. It's really exciting to be working with such exceptional committee members. So let's now take a moment to introduce those committee members. So CSAC members, I'll call on you one at a time. Please introduce yourselves with your name, your affiliation, your expertise very briefly. And so I'll go first to model, and then I'll be calling on you in alphabetical order. So I'm Jay Bright. I'm a senior fellow at NORC at the University of Chicago. I'm a mathematical statistician with interest in complex surveys, and I'm calling in from Fort Collins, Colorado. So Deborah Balk, are you on the line?
I am. Hi, good morning all. I am Deborah Balk. I am the director of the CUNY Institute for Demographic Research at the City University of New York and a professor in the Mark School of Public and International Affairs. I am a spatial demographer with interests in census and survey and remote sensing data, and I am calling in from the greater New York area. Nice to be here today.
Thanks, Deborah. One of our new members, Claire Bowen.
Hi, I'm Claire McKay Bowen. I'm a principal research associate and the statistics methods group lead at the Urban Institute with interest in developing and assessing data privacy and confidentiality methods and science communication. And I'm calling in from Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Great, thank you. And Tom Burnell.
Good morning. I'm Tom Burnell. I'm a political scientist at the University of Texas at Dallas. I study elections and representation, and I'm calling in from Richardson, Texas.
Thank you. And Bill Clark.
Good morning, everyone. Bill Clark here. I am Associate Dean of the Graduate School at Penn State University. Like Tom, I'm a political scientist by training, and I'm interested in comparative political institutions. And I am calling in today from State College, PA.
Thank you very much. John Chaika.
Good morning. I'm John Chaika. I'm retired from Mathematica, where I was most recently a senior fellow, although I continue to consult. I'm interested in statistical uses of administrative records and survey methods generally, and I'm calling in from Bethesda, Maryland.
Got a bit of feedback there. So Barbara Entwistle.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Barbara Entwistle. I'm professor of sociology and fellow of the Carolina Population Center at the University of North Carolina. I'm a social demographer interested in population-environment relations and also interested in data linkage issues. And I'm calling in from Chapel Hill. Very glad to be with you today.
Thanks, Barbara. Gwyn Evans Lomoyesva, and sorry, Gwyn, if I butchered.
That's all right.
One of our new members, I should have said.
My name is Gwen Evans Lomiespa. I am a Hopi tribal member, and I'm an I am a PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania in demography. My primary research interests and work have been with the AI and population data, and I'm calling in from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania today.
Thank you. Mario Moratti.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Mario Moratti. Hi, Jade. I'm calling in from San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I'm former executive director of the Puerto Rico Institute of Statistics, and I'm interested in all things official statistical methodologies. I'm an economist by training. Thank you.
Great, thank you. One of our new members, Mainak Mazumdar.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mainak Mazumdar. I'm with Nielsen Company. My title is Chief Data and Research Officer. I lead the data science team at Nielsen, and I'm actually trained as a demographer. Good to be here.
Thank you. Jessica McKellar.
Hey there. Jessica McKellar. I'm a computer scientist by training, a startup founder and a small business owner in San Francisco, California. I'm interested in how the census engages with and is used by businesses. And I'm a brand new mom, and I'm excited to count my daughter in the next census.
Thanks, Jessica. Kristen Moore.
Hi, I'm Chris Moore. I'm a senior scholar at Child Trends. I live in Washington, D.C., and my focus is children, youth, and families.
Great. One of our new members, Ron Prevost.
Good morning. This is Ron Prevost. I'm a research professor in the Massive Data Institute at Georgetown University. I'm a demographer with interest in current statistics and their policy impacts. I'm calling in from Brookville, Maryland.
Thank you. Another new member, Rogelio Saenz. We have Rogelio.
Okay, I'm sorry. I put the pen here so that I would remind myself to unmute and I forgot. I'm Rogelio Saenz. I'm professor in the Department of Demography at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And my interests are obviously demography, race, inequality, immigration. And I'm calling from San Antonio.
Thank you. Another new member, Seth Spielman.
Hi, I'm Seth Spielman. I'm a geographer by training. My expertise is in maps and measuring sort of social phenomena online and in the real world. And I'm calling in, I'm a director at Microsoft in the Core Search and Artificial Intelligence group. And I'm calling from Boulder, Colorado. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you. And another new member, Chad Syverson. I'm not sure if Chad's here today. So let me move on to Kunal Talwar.
Hi, I'm Kunal Talwar. I'm a research scientist at Apple. I'm a computer scientist by training, and I guess I'm interested in machine learning and differential privacy. And I'm calling in today from the San Francisco Bay Area.
Thank you. And another new member, Dipinder Upal. I'm not sure if Dipinder.
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
No, I appreciate it. So I'm Dipinder Upal. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the public sector for TIBCO, which is now Citrix. And prior to my role here, I was Assistant Division Director for the Criminal Justice Information Center. That would be the FBI node for NCIC, III. Prior to that, I was in academics, taught systems logic, advanced logic, probability. And then prior to that, I was in the United States military, served in the capacity of signals intelligence.
Thank you. And Lance Waller.
I'm Lance Waller. I'm professor of biostatistics and bioinformatics in the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University. My interests are in spatial statistics, geographic information systems, small area estimation, and I'm calling in from Atlanta, Georgia today.
Great. And last but not least, Rochelle Winkler.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rochelle Winkler. I'm a professor of sociology and demography at Michigan Technological University. My interests are in rural sociology, spatial demography, population environment relations, and I have a background in applied demography as well. I'm calling in from Houghton, Michigan in the Upper Peninsula.
Great. Thank you very much. So you can see from these introductions that the CSAC roster has now been filled out with excellent scientific and technical expertise across a wide range of disciplines, wide range of viewpoints. It's really exciting to be working with this exceptional group. And I want to express my gratitude to all of them for their willingness to volunteer their time and their expertise to CSAC. So a few other remarks. As chair, I tried to gather up some topics that are kind of on the collective mind of CSAC members, whether or not they're necessarily on the meeting agenda. And so a few themes that emerge. As always, we're interested in disclosure avoidance and the privacy utility trade-off. It's always at the top of our list. We're going to hear a lot about it during this meeting, both today and tomorrow when the Differential Privacy Working Group announces some of its findings and recommendations. So that's going to be focused on 2020 census data products, but of course, disclosure avoidance and other Bureau programs is certainly of interest. So we're happy to be hearing about improving disclosure protections on the current population survey, public use file later in this meeting. And we're also keenly interested in the American Community Survey including any disclosure avoidance methods planned for ACS, the timelines for such plans, how customers will be informed, what quality measures will be provided, how key linkages will be maintained. And for any such programs, we'd like to see clear, well-tested, practical, detailed, and step-by-step plans, so including for the main data products and also downstream uses at each level. CSAC is also very interested in the Bureau's plans for population estimates throughout the decade, since these are so critical in policy decisions, including funding. So we're really very interested to hear the upcoming briefing on the base evaluation and research team. We commend the Bureau for putting this team together. We recognize the importance of these problems, the challenges of these problems, and we're really looking forward to providing input. CSAC is always interested in updates on various topics, such as the 2030 Decennial Census Research Program and the FRAMES project, the broader curated data enterprise, and other topics. Fair warning to all Census Bureau presenters, CSAC members behave just like any other data users. They want small domains and they want smaller domains. So someone will always ask you a question, whether that domain is defined by geography or demography, they're going to ask you about those small domains. So expect it. What does this mean for use cases that involve allocating resources to local areas? What does it mean for children, young children, other undercounted or underrepresented groups? Finally, CSAC would like to take a moment just to express our thanks to John About as he transitions out of the role of Chief Scientist. And by now, a few generations of CSAC members have had the opportunity to interact with John. And we've all been tremendously impressed by his dedicated scholarship and hard work, especially on the vital problem of modernizing data protection in the face of rapidly evolving threats. So thank you very much, Dr. About. And I wonder if CSAC members, if we could unmute and just give John a round of applause. And thank you. It's also our pleasure to welcome Sally Keller as she transitions into this role of Chief Scientist. We're looking forward to hearing more about her vision for the continued success of the Bureau's scientific research agenda. Thank you, Dr. Keller.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to read John's chat. So John says, thank you. I have no voice, but I appreciate your thanks. So John has lost his voice. So thank you, Dr. Keller, for your willingness to take on this essential role. We're looking forward to working with you. And with that, let me turn it back over to Tommy Wright.
Thank you very much, Jay. And I just want to say before I introduce the director and the deputy director that I'm honored to serve with such a fine group of folks with extreme expertise and experience. It's just an honor. It really is. And now we'll hear from Bob Santos. Executive comments, remarks. Bob?
Okay, good morning, everyone. I too am honored to have such a great group representing CSAC and being the voice that we need to hear so that we can do our best to help improve things at the Bureau. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time, your expertise. Welcome to the new members. I'm really excited about the new members and look forward to their and your contributions, as well as the contributions of all the committee members in the coming days, weeks, months, years. With that, I also want to note that there are a couple of members that rotated off. And even though they may not be on, I wanted to say thank you to Lester Mackey and Jessica Holman for their contributions throughout their tenure with the committee. So I'm here to give a couple of quick updates. I won't take a lot of time because there's just some amazing material we're going to be covering, and I'm actually really excited about that and looking forward to your commentary. But here are a few updates on things that are going on. I wanted to mention our transformation and modernization initiative. To follow up from our spring 2022 discussion, where there was a presentation on that, we continue to make incremental progress on this enterprise initiative. It's a high priority. We're working all angles to encourage staff how to think differently about how they do their work. Our teams continue their implementation of the 3 anchors that undergird that transformation, the employee-driven initiatives, our continuous innovation, and our business ecosystem that takes an enterprise-wide look at data and how we're going to be treating that. There are not specific major milestones that I want to mention right now, but we will keep you posted as we continue to make progress. So let's please stay tuned, and we will keep you posted. So next is the 2030 census. Now, we all know that each census takes years of planning and preparation to count everybody. And it's a really complex process. We're actually focusing on 5 areas that you may have seen in an FRN recently. These 5 areas that we're looking at right now to establish projects to form the basis of our research agenda in combination with other stuff. But the 5 specific areas are data collection, because we want to enhance our data collection to effectively reach and count everyone, especially historically undercounted populations. The second area is counting people in group quarters. That was a struggle for us last time, and we're looking to modernize how we count people in group quarters, not just college dorms, which were a challenge, but also correctional facilities, nursing homes, and so forth. Data processing. We're looking to integrate data processing with data collection to more quickly address the issues and improve data quality in real time. The next area is infrastructure for operations. We're looking to improve that infrastructure by tying spaces, people, and IT together to be an even more effective foundation for implementing the 2030 census. And then lastly, continuous data collection and assessment of coverage and quality. We need to leverage existing data sources and seek new ones to continue so that we can have a continuous measurement of the population going into a decennial census. This will help us more effectively and efficiently conduct the census and count folks that historically are missed. So to learn from the 2020 census, we're doing a deep dive on data quality from the last census. This involves evaluating our operational quality metrics. We've recently put out a couple of reports on that, and there are more to come. We're analyzing results of the demographic analysis and post-enumeration survey, and thoroughly reviewing our census operations and asking folks like you and others to take a look independently and review our work. We're also working with the federal statistical agencies and other stakeholders on topics that could affect the 2030 census. One key step is that OMB, as you probably know, is in the process of reviewing its standards on Directive 15 that looks at how we collect and report data on race and ethnicity. Ron's going to talk a little bit more about that. We're also actively engaged with federal statistical agencies and other stakeholders on measuring SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity, in surveys. Whether we're able to add or change a question on the census really requires extensive testing, review, and evaluation to ensure that. And it looks like we may be getting some funding in the coming fiscal year to take a look and do a little bit of testing on SOGI questioning. And importantly, we have our August 17th release of a Federal Register notice that I mentioned earlier, asking for public input on the design and planning of the 2030 census. Our country is becoming more diverse, and much of that diversity happens to come from populations that are historically undercounted. And so we know we need to better measure those segments of our population. And to do that, we know that we can't do it alone. We need partnerships. We need voices out in the community to help us rethink how we're doing that. And so we have this request out to seek input, to listen to these diverse voices coming in, new, fresh ideas on how to plan and implement some type of continuous data collection, continuous outreach to get ideas and feedback that can feed into how we're going to do our 2030. We are focused on partner and community lessons learned from 2020. And that's a focus of this FRN as well. And so we're looking forward to that. We also would like to make sure that you know that we would love feedback from you as well. So don't forget to submit your own ideas for rethinking how the 2030 census might be done, and help us spread the word as well to make sure that your colleagues, your work buddies, the folks that you work with in terms of community, whatever community engagement you happen to be doing, they understand that there's an opportunity right now to do this, to provide this feedback. The feedback has a deadline of mid-December, so there's still a bit of time. Next, let me tell you about the 3 censuses that we're conducting. Well, one of the 3, actually, the 2022 economic census. We've just started respondent outreach, and data collection is going to commence in January 2023. The economic census is really the most comprehensive look at our economy, at businesses, and it establishes the benchmark from which we then look at trends across the future for things like gross domestic product, GDP and such. So it's really important. It's about to be launched, and we're looking forward to doing that. We're actually innovating in a couple of ways for that. We're asking businesses about North American product classifications that historically haven't been included, that include things like cryptocurrency or electric vehicles or even the cannabis industry. So we're making sure that we've refreshed that economic census. It's going out to, we're going to be collecting from like 8 million businesses across the country over this, starting in January. We're also expanding industry coverage for 2022, and we're including, for example, collecting data on support activities for crop production and animal production, because USDA doesn't happen to collect that with their census. So it'll be a nice bridge to make sure that we're capturing a more complete look at the agricultural industry. We're also going to be doing some automation things to make it easier for people to participate through various email and other mechanisms, as well as trying to reduce the burden of having to process all of the handwritten entries. So we're going to be using machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques for language processing of those to make for a more efficient collection and processing of the information. And then, of course, there's differential privacy that I wanted to touch on. So like, all official statistical agencies, we maintain strong protections around privacy and confidentiality. And it's our legal and ethical responsibility as public data stewards to ensure that privacy is not violated. All statistical agencies are facing disclosure threats that we all know that over time they're only going to grow. So we need to get ahead of the threats. And so we've tapped these strong privacy protections through the use of differential privacy. It's a methodology that most would agree is much more advanced than the current or the past decennial practice of data swapping and other types of techniques that most data users are accustomed to seeing. But I also think we can agree that differential privacy is far more protective against disclosure than previous methods. In fact, unlike the previous approaches, it provides a measurable risk of disclosure, as well as allows much more transparency regarding the methodology for disclosure avoidance. But it does come, as we all know, with a cost of dampening some of the granularity that data users have come to love and expect from past data sets. Also, the implementation of differential privacy to products like the upcoming DHC products for 2020, it takes some time. And it takes time because we need to go through an iterative process to hone in and to more finally calibrate the balance between accuracy and granularity on one side against the preservation of confidentiality and privacy on the other. And the longer the time it takes to do that means that we're not as timely in terms of producing our data products, and we recognize that. But we do believe that differential privacy can meet the objectives of disclosure avoidance, data granularity, and accuracy in a way that meets most data user needs. So we have a full schedule for today, so I'm wrapping up here. On behalf of everyone at the Census Bureau, thank you again for your participation on the CSAC, and I welcome committee recommendations to enhance our modernization and transformation and modernization initiative, and look forward to engaging with you over the course of the next 2 days. Thanks, and I'll, I guess, turn it over to Tommy or Ron.
Ron.
Thanks, Rob and Tommy. So Ron Jarman, Deputy Director. So I'll just do a couple quick updates here. First, let's start with the budget. So as you know, the 22 fiscal year ends midnight tomorrow. So we're all watching very closely, hoping that the Congress passes a continuing resolution so that we don't have to do a graceful shutdown of our. Oh, I was supposed to say where I'm coming from my basement in Alexandria, Virginia. Anyway, so we expect that to be done. So, but eventually, when we get a full budget, our 23 budget request is for $1.3 billion, about 151 million over our FY22 budget. And with that, we'll continue to release data products, evaluations, and assessments for the 2020 census. And as Rob said, be kicking off a lot of the work that we'll be doing to look at the 2030 design. We'll be advancing some administration priorities on equity, evidence, and climate change. As well, like Rob said, position the Census Bureau to transform and modernize our operations into a sort of 21st century data-centric organization as opposed to a siloed survey-centric organization. And this will be building, on a lot of the investments that we made for the 2020 census and the successful things that we did there, using enterprise-wide solutions to improve how we collect and process our data, as well as sort of cross-cutting research on techniques and capabilities that'll be more responsive to data users and so on. So in addition to completing the 20, we're getting some feedback. So hopefully, so in addition to completing our 2020 census products and planning for 2030, there'll be a number of sort of major data initiatives coming up. So that the budget will support. So one is to provide new information on our community resilience estimates, our business formation statistics, and our global demographic and economic statistics. Improving data on race and ethnic demographic characteristics in our data products and those of other agencies. So we've been doing some interesting work with folks like the IRS to help them put race and ethnicity codes onto their data. Enhancing data on small populations, such as Alaska Indian and American Indian and Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, while making other investments in the CPS to maintain our data collection activities. We'll be exploring ways to, like Rob said, to look at SOGI data as part of the American Community Survey. So excited about that work. And then also importantly, preserving investments that we did in 2020 in our geospatial area that underlie all of our data products, both on the household side and on the business side. And then support research on sort of new methods and processes and computing and data science. Rob mentioned the use of AI and stuff like that for the economic sense, expand that stuff elsewhere. So like Rob mentioned, this past June, the new chief statistician, Karen Orvis, announced that her office is beginning a formal review of the OMB standards, Directive 15 on collecting and reporting data on race and ethnicity. And so this obviously is a critical step that the Census Bureau supports and is supporting, and it will help the government, be able to better provide this information going forward. As you know, the current standard has been in place since the 90s. So this undertaking will follow a rigorous and formal review process that'll include convening an interagency technical working group that's already up and running, that develop a proposal, as well as lots of opportunities for the public to comment throughout the process. Ultimately, it's designed to ensure rigor, validity, and objectivity of the recommended revisions, and ultimately the revised standards that will seek to improve the ability of the government to capture the diversity of the American people. It's important that we get this right, and so we're committed to a full and transparent formal review process for updating OMB's race and ethnicity standards that gives the public and all of the impacted agencies a meaningful opportunity to share their perspectives. So we expect to incorporate the research that was performed last decade at the Census Bureau, as well as the perspectives shared with the Equitable Data Working Group that I was a part of last year, and lessons learned from the 2020 census. So, we understand the importance of moving along quickly and with purpose, and the chief statistician has made this a top priority for her and for her office. So, so we really look forward to continuing the work on that. So finally, I know we want to leave time for some of your questions. Just let me say a couple quick things about the ACS. So, as you all know, during the collection year 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic impaired our ability to collect responses on the ACS, but we were able to revise our methodology and produce the 2016 to 2025 year data, that were fit for release, and the 1 year data we produced experimental estimates for. So I think we were successful in sort of nimbly adapting to new methods, and were able to get that data out. So it was a huge effort on a part of a team from around the Bureau to get that done. So for 2021, the 1 year estimates are scheduled to be released, on time, or they were released on time, and they'll be available for everybody, and we're looking to release the PUMS file here later this year. The 5-year estimates, I think, will be released on time in December, and these will have the detailed geographic areas, including tracts, ZICTAs, and block groups. So looking forward to sort of reestablishing the normal cadence to ACS releases and moving forward with that. I think I'll stop there. I got pages more that I could talk about, but I want to leave at least 15 minutes here for discussion. So, Tommy, I guess I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Rob and Ron.
Hey, Tommy, I wanted to make a correction because I've been told that I misspoke and on the deadline for the feedback from the 2030 census request for ideas, the FRN. The deadline is November 15th. Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Rob and Ron. And I'm going to turn it over to Jay, who will orchestrate the question in this. Yes, Jay.
Thank you, Tommy. This is Jay Bright again. So are there questions from CSAC members? And it might be a little hard to see raised hands here, so I'm going to be doing some scrolling. While waiting for that, I might just ask Director Santos about I think you mentioned a segment of the agricultural economy that's not covered by National Agricultural Statistics Service Ag Census that you will be picking up. Could you just say a little bit more about that?
I wish I could, but I don't know any more than we're filling a gap. So maybe Ron or some of the other folks know. If Nick was here, he might know.
Yeah, I think Nick is on. Nick, could you say something about that?
Yes. So,
state your name. Please state your name, Nick Orsini.
Nick Orsini, Associate Director for Economic Programs, Census. We were approached by USDA and NASS to look into these sectors, animal production and crop production, since they were not being captured on the agricultural census for many cycles, and they were eliminated from the economic census when the agricultural census moved to the Department of Ag. So it's really an area that has been unmeasured for many decades, I would say. We've worked hand in hand with USDA and NASS on comparing frames, trying to ensure that we're actually measuring the universe here in the census, and I think we've completed that effort. So the initial round in 2022, we're going to just collect some of the core statistics like revenue, employment, payroll, those types of things, but we hope to expand them over the coming censuses and possibly within our annual programs as well.
Great, thank you very much. I see Seth Spielman, you have your hand up?
Yeah, there was an interesting statement, and I was wondering if you could unpack it a little bit for us. And so one of the things that was said in the introduction was that the Census Bureau is sort of transitioning from a survey-centric organization to a data-centric organization. And I was wondering what that sort of means, operationally, structurally, or what your sort of vision is around that phrase.
Yeah, certainly. I can tell my version. Ron has a much richer version, but I can do a pretty high-level one where historically the Census Bureau has operated both in terms of sort of essentially separate directorates, each of which do their own thing. And within that, when we go out and collect data, it's been much more of a transaction where we solicit information from an individual or a business and receive the information, process it, compile it, and then create our data products. The shifting of the mindset or of this conceptual framework is going from one that involves a bunch of dyadic transactions to one that looks at the ingestion of data from all sources and the linking from all sources. So not only do you have your regular surveys and you're collecting data, but you also have the master frames, like our master address file, master business frame, or geographic frames and things of that sort. The idea is to ingest all of that with all of the other data that we collect, survey, census, or otherwise, and through linking processes, including administrative records, by the way, through linking processes, we create a much richer set of data from which one can then pose research questions and request statistical data products that can more efficiently and effectively be addressed. And we have some examples on how we've been creatively doing that with that Ron can speak to. But that's the basic idea, to create a single enterprise that doesn't rely necessarily on individual directorates collecting their own data, but thinking about a single enterprise that ingests data from all sources and processes them, and then allows for analyses and insights that historically have been done, but also that have never been thought of before. So there's new power and new ability to address issues. Ron, can you talk a little more?
Yeah. So Rob, I think you did a great job. I mean, I think that the Census Bureau and other stat agencies have often managed things by a survey collection platform. So we manage the current population survey, we manage the economic census, we manage the ACS, and all of the everything about the outputs from those surveys is kind of soup to nuts. Design the survey and take it through the outputs. What we're trying to recognize is that sort of the measurement environment that is much broader than survey measurement, and that we can tap more effectively into administrative data. The econ side of the house has been using administrative data effectively for decades, and we'd like to see more of that done on the household side. But also beyond that, a lot of the information that's relevant for our social and economic measurement mission is sitting in private sector organization computers. So we're doing a lot of work on the retail side on trying to tap into third party and other sort of non-survey type data to improve measurement in the retail sector, and obviously with the goal of trying to produce more timely and more granular estimates. So for instance, Nick's team has been able to produce monthly state level estimates because we're able to get some of this data that we couldn't get really through survey means. So it's this notion that we want to manage the estimate, not the survey collection platform, and you start from that we want to produce the best data, then you figure out how you're going to assemble the source data to compute those statistics, and do so in a very cost-effective way. So this is not only a means of trying to give our data users better data, but it's also giving us more levers to control sort of the cost and quality issues involved in doing that. So it's really about thinking about what's coming out at the end of the pipe as the first priority. So.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great answer, and it's actually, I think, really exciting to know. I think the framework makes a lot of sense, and clearly creates a lot of downstream opportunities. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. This is Jay Bright again, and I just want to second the comments that's a fascinating topic. Everything we've been hearing about in this development of kind of the broader data enterprise is CSAC always says we want to hear more about this. So, we're always interested in updates there. So a couple of hands up. So Mario Marazzi, please.
Hi, it's good to see Rob again. I haven't seen him in a couple of years. And congratulations to your appointment. I haven't had a chance to congratulate you. I was really intrigued when you mentioned that the economic census is going to be using machine learning to sort of read written responses. And I just wanted to know if that's something that's going to be applied in Puerto Rico.
It's going to be applied not only in the economic census, but we're looking to see how we can take that approach for other aspects of other data collections that we do as well. So that's certainly something we're going to be looking at. In fact, we even have a unit, an innovation unit at the Census Bureau, whose mission is to take the practice of machine learning and AI and see how they can apply it in different settings. First as a pilot, and then to scale it to other areas.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, I hope that. I mean, I think that this might even be a future topic for CSAC to get an understanding of how that's being done, because it could really have an important impact on the ultimate results and how things are interpreted. And how specifically these models are trained. And, you know, as sort of the first question that pops into my mind, is it going to be trained on a nationwide basis and then applied everywhere? Or are communities that maybe are more, you know, oriented to speaking other languages, are we going to train them specifically for those groups as well apart in a way that you know, is more, it does more justice to what was written on those responses, if you will.
Yeah, I think.
Just a question to sort of.
Yeah, actually, Nick was going to chime in, so go ahead, Nick.
Hi, this is Nick Orsini, Associate Director for Economic Programs. So for the economic census, it will be handled in Puerto Rico the same way it's handled stateside. The primary way we're going to start using machine learning with the census is through the classification. So right now we get, I would say, hundreds of thousands to millions of write-ins for classifications of businesses and products. We've developed machine learning models to take descriptions and kind of walk the respondent through that effort. So their company is classified much more accurately, and their products are classified much more accurately. We've done significant amount of testing on it, and these models are very accurate. Actually, they found some misclassification that our analysts would make and helped us correct those. So we're really excited about this for reducing burden on the Census Bureau side, but also on the respondent side. So it's a great improvement.
So, and if I may follow up with a slight question to that, Nick, because I thought we were analyzing written responses, but it sounds like it's more part of the web platform.
Yes, it is. It is integrated right into the actual response timing. So as the respondent is filling out the census, they will be walked through it.
So, and the other quick question I had for both of you, actually, Director Orsini has confided in me that he's made an internal proposal for dramatically expanding the coverage of Puerto Rico in several Census Bureau surveys. Is this an appropriate vehicle to get an update on whether that proposal is moving forward or whether it's yet moving forward?
Yeah, I cannot speak to that right now. I know that there are efforts both at the Department of Commerce level as well as on our own to make sure that Puerto Rico is attended to in terms of getting as much attention for the challenges that it has that are unique to itself, both on the economic side for data collection as well as on the population side. But we're absolutely looking at that.
So Maurizio, I would say that, you know, I think it's been a goal of ours for some time to normalize data collection for Puerto Rico and the other territories similar to what we have stateside. You know, right now we can't comment on what might be in the president's budget, and so because it's not there yet. So, but hopefully maybe this time next year we could have some discussions about what what that might look like. So.
Thank you so much, and I apologize for the difficult question.
Thank you. Claire?
Hi, apologies for my voice as well. I caught a cold, it seems, so hopefully people can understand what I'm saying. So I heard the comment about trying to provide demographic information to IRS data, and so I'm kind of curious as to like other kind of data sets that Census Bureau is looking into, especially with the different privacy laws that are in place, because it seems like if there's any kind of collaboration among the federal statistical agencies, you have to figure out how to renegotiate each time, which takes a lot of time and effort. So is there ways that Census Bureau is looking into providing that kind of information to, again, to the other federal agencies while still tackling those different laws that are in place?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. We literally have to create memos of understanding for each unit that we, with whom we either receive information or share type of information. And each of them has a deadline, which mean or a time frame, which means at the end of that time frame they need to be renegotiated, and each of them has a different title associated with privacy protections. What is interesting is that when we receive data from IRS and from Social Security Administration and other sources that are federal sources, we have to abide by their particular restrictions, privacy restrictions. But once we ingest it and we begin manipulating the data, it falls under Title 13, because then it's different than simply the data that we started with. So to the extent that we receive data, process it, and make something new out of it, that becomes Title 13 census data. And that's typically the way these things happen. Ron, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah. So one thing, Claire, I would say, clearly, if this is successful, we will want to explore with other agencies, Social Security Administration, perhaps being one of them, about how we could do this. So what we're doing with IRS is really a model-based thing. So we're taking IRS data and figuring out how to combine that with other publicly available information and be able to enhance their ability to put race and ethnicity on their internal data. And so if that's successful, then I think we want to explore ways we can work with other agencies. But right now we're sort of avoiding the complication of having something where Title 13, Title 26 are sort of both being implicated in this. We're doing it kind of in a Title 26 kind of space. So that's the IRS code versus the census code. So sorry. Inside terminology.
Thank you for the clarification.
It's Jay Bright again. It looks like we're right on time, so I'll turn it back over to Tommy Wright.
Tommy Wright, thank you, Jay, and thank you, Rob and Ron and the committee members for that particular discussion and exchange. Now for our first topic of the day, Jason Devine, Matthew Spence, Alexandra Kraus, Michael Halls, Nicholas Jones, Rachel Marks, and Mark Mather will present update on the 2020 census data products. There will be a discussion, John Chiker, and committee discussion. I think Jason's going first, looks like.
Jason Devine, good afternoon. I'm Jason Devine. Happy to be able to talk to the Census Scientific Advisory Committee about the Demographic and Housing Characteristics file. I guess we are waiting for the presentation to show up. Is it visible to people, or it is? So, okay, hold on one second.
I think it's there. I see the first slide, I think.
Okay, there it is. You're right. I had to reload. So let me take control. We're using a new approach this time. Okay, I think we're ready. So you're going to get an extended data products presentation today. We're going to cover all of the 2020 census data products, but we're going to start first with the DHC, or the Demographic and Housing Characteristics file. It's an important time for the DHC because there we go. an important time for the DHC because we're getting close to finalizing the settings for the disclosure avoidance system that's going to support this product. So we're legally obligated to protect data under U.S. Code Title 13. And as has been mentioned earlier, technology computing power has advanced to the point where new methods are needed that more strongly protect against disclosure. We have added a new tool called differential privacy to our toolbox, and we're using it in our 2020 census data products to protect against disclosure avoidance. Did my slide change to the first slide?
No, Jason. This is Shauna.
Okay, so you should be able to see the graphic with the census data products.
I don't on my screen. I don't show that you have control. Do you have control?
I took control.
Can you tell me what you see?
I see the presentation and a row of presentations across the bottom.
Okay.
Like a row of the slides, like all of the slides are across the bottom.
Helen, this is Shauna. Are you able to advance slides?
Somebody else is in control.
Okay.
Just fine. So if you want to just advance through the slides for us, that will work.
Is this the right slide?
You can go forward one, please. Actually, 2 slides. I don't see the slide changing. This is a new approach they're using today for controlling the slides. So
I see the slide changing. No, not for you?
I don't see it, but I can go through it though if it is changing and just go from my memory.
So currently we're looking at the timeline. Is this accurate?
You'd go back one, but I'm still seeing the first slide.
Matthew or Alexandra, what are you seeing on your screen? Excuse us just a moment.
I'm seeing the released future effort.
The current slide. Okay.
Yeah.
Jason, I'm not sure what's happening. Is that slide you want us to be on, the 2020 census data products released in future effort?
Well, I can pick up from there, and then you can just let me know when you've changed slides, and I'll go from my memory of the presentation. So the 2020 census data products graphic that you should be looking at shows where we're at in our efforts to produce the 2020 census data products. We've, of course, released the apportionment product and the redistricting file, with the redistricting file being the first product that was protected using the new disclosure avoidance methodology. And now we're focused on the demographic profile and the demographic and housing characteristics file, or the DHC, with the demographic profile being a subset of tables from the DHC in a more easy to use format. The planned release for the DHC is May of 2023. And for the later products associated with the DHC, those include the detailed DHC-A, which is planned for August 2023. Then there's the DHC-B and the supplemental DHC with release dates to be determined. And there's some products planned for future efforts that includes a public use microsample or PUMS file. And I'll say that the PUMS file, we're discussing internally what the form of that file will take, but it will not be a traditional PUMS file. And then we'll also be doing special tabulations. And there may be other ways that people could access 2020 census data, such as through the FSRDC network. Next slide, please. So you should see the timeline that shows us where we are in our effort. I've circled in this timeline the area I'd like us to focus on today and the area, the point in time that we're at right now. The timeline shows how, beginning as early as 2019, we were working on the development of the disclosure avoidance system to support the redistricting product and the DHC, and that effort and that tuning has been ongoing. Since then, we're now getting close to the final part of this effort, which included 2 demonstration products. 2 demonstration products, with the second demonstration product going out about a month ago, with the feedback period closing just recently, this Monday, actually. So we have received feedback, and we are in the process of going through that feedback and understanding that feedback. And that feedback will be combined with internal analysis of the products, and that information will go to our Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee, who will consider that and help make the final decisions about the settings for the privacy loss budget for the disclosure avoidance system to support that product. Next slide. So the DHC provides tables with demographic and housing information from the 2020 census, includes tables with data on sex, age, Hispanic origin, race, relationship to householder, household type, that's family and non-family, and household size and tenure being owner or renter occupied, and also owner occupied with a mortgage or free and clear, and also vacancy status, and includes counts by race and Hispanic origin, along with housing unit counts. But those were already released as part of the redistricting file, but they'll also be included in the DHC. So those counts by race and Hispanic origin and the housing accounts that were already released will be maintained in the DHC exactly as they were in the redistricting file. Some tables are provided by the following categories and combinations of categories. Includes white alone, Black or African American alone, American Indian, Alaska Native alone, Asian alone, Native Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islander alone, some other races alone, 2 or more races, Hispanic or Latino origin, and white alone or not Hispanic or Latino. The geography varies by table, but many tables are available at all geographies. For example, that will include nation, state, county, tract, block group, block, place, and American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian areas. Does not include detailed race and ethnicity or American Indian, Alaska Native tribe and village populations. These detailed groups are in the detailed DHC-A and detailed DHC-B. So a little bit now about the demonstration products. The Census Bureau applies the new disclosure avoidance protections to the 2010 census tables, and the Census Bureau produces measures of the differences from the 2010 census tables that we call detailed summary metrics. We then release the demonstration tables and the measures of the differences, and the public analyzes the differences between the demonstration and 2010 census data. And the public assesses the impact for different uses of the data and then provides feedback to the Census Bureau through 2020 DAS at census.gov. And I'm sorry, I don't know if I gave the right order to move forward with slides. Are you, did you make it to the right slide, the next slide there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The second DHC demonstration data product was released on August 25th. We requested feedback by September 26th, last Monday, I guess this Monday. It included tables and geographies added to the demographic and housing characteristic product based on feedback that we had received in an earlier comment period. Based on that feedback, we lowered the proposed level of geography from state or county level to the census tract level for 16 tables and 63 tables, iterated tables or tables repeated by race and ethnicity. And we added a sex by single year of age table repeated by race and ethnicity at the tract level. We increased accuracy across many topics, which Matt is going to show you when he gets to his portion. And we made enhancements to the supporting materials, such as the 2020 Census Data Planning Crosswalk. And we released the person and house unit summary files at the same time this time, whereas the first demonstration product, they were released as a separate product. We had a public feedback request associated with this demonstration product, and we're extended the feedback period to include the CSAC meeting. What we asked was for the public to analyze the differences between the demonstration data and the 2010 census data. And if those numeric differences were the same in the 2010 census tables, the 2020 census tables, so if those numeric differences were the same in the 2020 census tables as those in the 2010 demonstration data product, would there be specific tables or geographies where the differences would be acceptable? Would there be specific tables or geographies where the differences would not be acceptable? And how would that impact your uses of the data? And I'll stress here that this was the last demonstration data product and the last opportunity for the public to provide feedback before the disclosure avoidance settings were set or finalized for the DHC product. All right, thank you. We're now going to go into the results section. Matt is going to take over. I didn't actually do all of that by memory. I was able to pull up a presentation and use that I had on another device. But thank you, and sorry about the slides. Hopefully, Matt, you have better luck than I did. Thank you.
I'm Matt at Chanabank. Can you hold just a moment? So just a message for our viewers on YouTube. There is an issue with the slides syncing, so please be patient with us. You can go to the CSAC website and pull up the presentations from there to follow along. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Spence. I'm in the Population Division of the U.S. Census Bureau. Thank you, Jason. I hope that everyone can see my results slide, and as we move forward here. So are we seeing metrics on accuracy? Great.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So one of the things that, I think that everyone here is familiar with are these detailed summary metrics that we've been putting out since the very beginning, trying to communicate about accuracy, about bias, and about just counting, how many outliers are there? What's the shape of the data look like when differential privacy has been applied? We've released now 8 different versions of the detailed summary metrics. Many of them have had some form of demonstration data available. The most recent one was released in August, just about a month ago. As Jason mentioned, we had a public comment period where we received some feedback from external stakeholders. But I also wanted to shed some light about what we're doing internally to look at these data to assess the demographic reasonableness of the data. So here I'm going to share 2 new concepts with you, both of which are, the idea of the 95th percentile. So, previously we had been looking at sort of the average amount of error, the average amount of difference or distance, mean absolute error, MAE, and mean absolute percent error are great measures of sort of like absolute difference or, absolute, relative difference on average. But the 95th percentile is a somewhat different concept. It is what do 95% of the geographies experience for this characteristic? So here, looking ahead to the table, we're looking at tenure. This is at the census tract level. So you imagine that you take the published 2010 data, and then you take the 2010 differentially private demonstration data value for that tract, and you compare the two. You get the absolute difference or the absolute error. And then you line them all up to get the 95th percentile. You line them up from smallest difference, so many of them will have 0, and then you get all the way up to the biggest difference on the far right side. And the 95th percentile takes, what is that 95th one out of 100? What does the bulk, 95% of tracts experience for this particular measurement? And then the 95th percentile absolute percent error is the same sort of measurement, but it's looking at relative error, so absolute percent error. So here, just looking at tenure, you can see we've got 3 different values, 3 different levels of tenure: owned with a mortgage, owned free and clear, i.e. no mortgage, and renter occupied. And so one of the things that we've been doing is, looking at what's the overall size of the population. For a tract, the largest group is owned with a mortgage at 725. The least prevalent is owned free and clear with 315. We're not only looking at that mean absolute error, which is the second column of data, but also that middle column of data, the 95th percentile. And what we're seeing, and you can see it both when you're looking at the 95th percentile absolute error, as well as the 95th percentile absolute percent error on the far right, that in general, we're seeing acceptable errors even for that 95th percentile case. 95% of tracts are seeing less than a 4% change for a very small group, the owned free and clear. So that is very encouraging. And we see similar stories, even when we're looking at characteristics that have extremely large differences. So, here, this is looking at the county level. We're looking at different kinds of coupled household types. The most prevalent coupled household type is the opposite sex married couple household. The average population of a county is 17,000 or almost 18,000. And then the least common is right underneath it, same-sex married couple household with only about 111. Now, this is in 2010, and there are some caveats about how we had to get these data, but the point remains that this remained a very less prevalent characteristic, even at the county level. And so looking at the mean absolute error, you can see that 1 is about 6 for the opposite sex married couple households, and below it is about 3 to 4, 3.6, somewhere in there. So even though these are radically different sizes in population, we're seeing similar levels of mean absolute error. And that middle column of data, the 95th AE or 95th percentile absolute error, we're still seeing that the amount of error is acceptable for even these very small characteristics, 111 households on average. The 95th percentile is at 9. So, 95% of counties have a less than 9 household change. When we see absolute percent errors, this is where we do start to see some issues with small counts. And this is just one of these things that we always like to keep in mind, that you really have to make sure that you're treating zeros correctly when you're doing percent errors. So 0 changing to 0, we mark it as a 0% error, even though that's technically not calculable, because 0 minus 0 divided by 0 is not a number, but we count it as 0. And we also handle zeros changing to a positive value using a way that's been accepted by the profession. So in general, though, these percent errors can look very large, even though the absolute errors are not so large. We've also worked to address particular topics such as presence of own children under 6. We know that that has a lot of great use cases. We've worked to address that at various levels, not only counties, not only incorporated places, but also school districts, all 3 levels. And this is one of those cases where, because we've really worked hard to get the presence of own children characteristic handled for school districts, you can see that the mean absolute error seems to be larger for school districts than it is for, say, incorporated places. But when you look at things like the absolute percent error, we're seeing 60%, 27%, and 25% for elementary, secondary, and unified school districts. This gives us the confidence that in general, we're seeing reasonable errors for that 95th percentile case. When we start to cross tabulate variables, that's when we start to see some sort of notes of caution. So here we're looking at tenure, 2 levels of tenure now, owner versus renter, by age of householder. And I've highlighted 2 cells. I've highlighted 41 and 92%. And this is the youngest householders aged 15 to 24 who are homeowners. And you can see that the mean of this group is 277, again, in comparison with thousands generally at the county level. This is one where we start to see, errors that are starting to get a bit higher for that 95th percentile case. An error of 41 relative to 277 might start to get to a level of concern. So this is, again, how we've been reviewing the data and how we've been giving feedback to our science team, and they've been taking our feedback and developing further improvements. Likewise, when we start to restrict, even if we're looking at one characteristic, but if we start to look at only small places or only small, sort of crosstabs, this is where we're also starting to see somewhat concerning absolute errors and 95th percentile absolute errors. But this is looking at counties with total population of less than 1,000 people. There are only 35 counties in 2010 that had fewer than 1,000 people. And you can see that the mean population is very small, because again, this is just the subset of counties with fewer than 1,000 people. So there are really only 3 households on average that are 7 or more people in these less populous counties. But because it's 3, and because the mean absolute error is nearly 5, and that 95th percentile absolute error is 13, you can see that we start to get a bit of we're having a bit of caution when we're seeing these numbers. So we do want to take that with a bit of caution. The final thing I'd like to share with you, this is also from the second demonstration data product, and this is something that we've heard from external stakeholders, but we also reported internally, was that looking at certain things like tenure by race of householder, this cross, for whatever reason, just has had higher errors. Whoops, sorry about that. Has had higher errors than we're comfortable with. I've highlighted several cells, I've bolded several cells that sort of indicate areas that we are concerned about. But in general, we want accuracy for this use because we know the use case is to compare things like the Black homeownership rate with the white homeownership rate. And if you could see that the Black or African American alone row, the homeowners cell is about 1,900, whereas the renter cell for Black or African American alone householder is about 2,500. So in general, you think, okay, renting is more prevalent than owning for the average county. And yet with the 95th percentile absolute error being 156 and 102 respectively, you could imagine that these might reverse, and you might start to get a different perspective for a given county. You might start to see, oh, well, now Black homeownership is more prevalent than Black rental, and that is not necessarily something that we like to see. We want, in general, the story of a particular community to remain the same, even with that addition of noise. And so work has been ongoing to improve, in particular, race of householder, because we do know that it is a cross variable that is frequently used. So all this just to show you a bit of information about how we've been looking at the data, how we're starting to think about communicating these results to the public. Just generally, single characteristics, very good, even down to the tract level or even below. Some cross tabulations and some cross tabulations in smaller, less populous areas we're starting to have a little bit of caution about. And then other areas like this one I'm showing, tenure by race of householder, we're still working on, and this is not the final say. We are continuing to strive for additional accuracy here. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Alexandra. And I don't remember if she would like me to drive her slides or if she'd like to drive the slides.
You can drive them. I only have a few. So thank you, Matt. I'm Alexandra Krause, Survey Statistician in Population Division. Matt talked about a few of the changes, a few of the improvements that we are looking to make. On the next slide, I'll talk about some of the improvements that we did make in the second demonstration data product. So as Jason mentioned, we've released 2 DHC demonstration data products that supported all of the DHC content. When you're looking at the second demonstration data product, you will see that the things shown on the screen have improved since that first one. That includes centenarians, or people who are 100 years or older, relationship to householder, detailed group quarters type, age of householder, presence and age of own children, tenure, household and housing unit characteristics more generally. This is because, there's the 2 files, the person file, which has person level characteristics, and the housing or unit file, which has the household and householder characteristics. We added more privacy loss budget to the unit file in general. So we kind of saw improvement in accuracy a little bit across the board, and then unified school districts as well. On the next slide, you'll see some improvements that we've been working on since the second demonstration data product was released. So if we can go to the next slide. So since that data product was released, these are some of the things that we have worked on and we have seen improvement. This includes elementary and secondary school districts, single year of age for children under 18 years, and some lower level geographies, including tabulation block group. These three bullets in particular, we heard a lot from data users, and so we have been focusing on these as well. Next slide. Great, thanks. So as Jason mentioned, today we're here to provide an update on the DHC and get your feedback on the DHC demonstration data product. For these demonstration data products, we apply the current iteration of the disclosure avoidance system to the 2010 census data so the public can compare and assess the impact of differential privacy. And so what we ask data users and what we're looking for is what tables or topics for a given geography are acceptable and which topics and geographies need some improvement. It's also helpful to know, how much improvement do they need in use cases as well. And so we did get public comments this past Wednesday, September 26th, and we look forward to your feedback as well. Matt showed us some results focusing on the 95th percentile, and I showed some improvements since the previous demonstration data product. So this is the last opportunity to get your feedback for the demonstration data product, and your feedback will inform DCEP's decision on the final settings for DHC. Then we'll start production, processing, reviewing, tabulating, and disseminating. So we value and look forward to your feedback. Thanks.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to those from points west. I'm Michael Hawes. I'm Senior Advisor for Data Access and Privacy in the Census's Research and Methodology Directorate. So we've been talking about tuning our disclosure avoidance system for production of the demographic and housing characteristics file. And as I'm sure you all know, tuning a disclosure avoidance system is about finding the optimal balance of privacy protection on the one hand and fitness for use and data utility on the other. Now, Jason, Matt, and Alexandra have been talking to you about the kind of data utility and fitness for use side of that optimization. And I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the other side of the equation, the privacy protection. Now, in general, disclosure avoidance methods like differential privacy and other formally private approaches to data protection allow you to really assess and quantify the degree of privacy protection through your privacy loss budget. In the case of our system, that's measured through the parameter row. And we've published the row allocations that were used for the recent demonstration data, and those are available on our website. But there are other ways of assessing disclosure risks as well. In particular, we can assess how well is the disclosure avoidance system protecting against known vectors of attack. In particular, the vector of attack that we exposed in our simulated attack on the 2010 published census tables. So today I'm going to give a brief walkthrough of kind of the results of a similar re-identification study that has been performed on that second demonstration data product that we released last month. Those of you who attended the spring CSAC meeting of this year, this is an updated version of that presentation. So in the interests of time, I'm into all of the details that are included in here, but they are all available in the slide deck that has been provided. I do also want to note in that March CSAC presentation, there were a few rounding and transcription errors in some of the data we presented. Those have been corrected in this version, and we'll also be posting a corrected version of that March presentation for you. All right, let's see if I can actually control the slides here. All right, so just a reminder, disclosure avoidance for the 2010 census was implemented for the tabular summaries through a process known as swapping. Additional disclosure avoidance was implemented for the public use microdata sample, but the tabular data that was published from the 2010 census was protected using that swapping mechanism. Also, just a reminder that reconstruction embedded re-identification involves converting those published tabular summaries into reconstructed microdata and then linking those microdata to a third party file to reattach names and other confidential information. This is a list of the tables that we used in our simulated attack on the 2010 census. discussion about the types of external data that could be leveraged in such an attack. We've done this in two different ways. We performed this against a commercial data file that was commercially available data from the 2010 time period, but understanding that better commercial data was available and could be available to an attacker, we also replicated our analysis using the census edited file as the matching file in an attempt to estimate a more kind of worst case assessment of what an attacker might be able to do. Again, I'm going to skip through some slides for the sake of brevity. Here is the agreement rates of our reconstructed microdata to the census edited file. So this is the percentage of all of the reconstructed records that agree exactly with the CEF on the individual's location, sex, age, race, and ethnicity. And what you'll see here are in the top row, that's the attack against the published 2010 tables that were protected using swapping. The second row is an enhanced version of the swapping algorithm. The third row is the first round of demonstration data that we released back in the spring. And the fourth row in red is the second round of demonstration data that we released in August. And noted here for the two sets of demonstration data are the privacy loss budgets that were assigned to the persons file for those demonstration data, row of 3.325 for round one and a row of 3.65 for round two. And what you can see is the agreement rates for the reconstructed records have dropped substantially. So 91.8% agreement rate between the reconstructed data and the CEF when measured on the published 2010 tables protected using swapping. That's down to 35% in the second round of demonstration data. And this further breaks that down by block size, and you can see in particular we've dropped that also substantially for the smallest blocks, those with 1 to 9 individuals and those with 10 to 49, from 74 and 93% down to 7 and 17%. But just agreement rates between the reconstructed data and the confidential data is not enough to actually indicate a disclosure risk. An attacker would have to be able to reattach individuals' names to that. So to do that, we have to do a re-identification attack on those reconstructed records. That requires kind of defining some aspects of the analysis. I'm not going to go into those details. They are all included in the slides. It also requires having some kind of specified re-identification statistics. In a nutshell, those are your putative re-identification rate, your confirmed re-identification rate, and your precision. The putatives are the percent of records that agree on your linkage variables, so block, sex, and age, as a percent of your data-defined universe. Your confirmed are your percent of records that agree on all of the reconstructed variables as a percent of the data-defined population. And your precision is the percent of records that agree on all of those variables as a percent of your putative records. So the re-identification precision rate, in other words, is an attacker's confidence in whether they correctly re-identified an individual. Here are the basic re-identification statistics for the entire data-defined population. The top 4 rows are measured against the commercial data file as the external attack file that I mentioned. The bottom 4 are using the CEF as the attacker file to give an estimation of what better quality linking data could produce in such an attack. And again, you'll notice that we've dropped the putative rates down from 60% when measured against the published 2010 tables down to 39 in the most recent demonstration data, or from 97 to 45 against the higher quality external data. Precision rates have likewise dropped, so an attacker's confidence has dropped as well. Most disclosure avoidance methods really focus on trying to protect population uniques. Those are often considered to be the individuals most at risk of re-identification. These are similar re-identification statistics for population uniques, those who are unique within their block on sex, age, and on location, sex, and age. And again, you can see we've dropped those precision rates down substantially. In the published 2010 tables using swapping, the precision rate was a shocking 94.6%. That means that if an attacker got a match for a population unique, they could be 95% confident that their re-identification was accurate. We've dropped those putative rates down substantially and the precision rates down as well, thus kind of demonstrating that the overall risk of re-identification here is reducing with the parameter settings of the disclosure avoidance system. We also perform similar ones for individuals of the non-modal race and ethnicity within their blocks. These are population uniques that differ from the rest of their block in terms of modal or non-modal race. So for the non-modal race of individuals, those who are not in the largest cell of the 126 cell histogram of Hispanic ethnicity crossed with race, those who are in all of the other cells, but except for the largest, you can see we've dropped those precision rates down substantially from almost 90% to 21%. So decreasing the attacker's confidence in re-identification of those individuals substantially. Similar results for the modal individuals. And then here is a summary of all of these re-identification statistics against the results from the initial 2010 published tables of the reconstruction attack. So you can see the improvements for the enhanced swapping, for the first round of demonstration data, and for the second round of demonstration data. One last thing I did want to mention before I turn things over is there's been a lot of discussion about what we call solution variability. And what that means is that for certain blocks, the tables from SF1 in the 2010 census that we use to reconstruct the microdata imply multiple possible reconstructed microdata, meaning you can come up with multiple solutions, multiple sets of reconstructed records that all conform to those aggregate statistics from the 2010 published tables. There are many cases where you get multiple possible solutions, but there are also many cases where there is only one possible solution, one possible set of microdata that could yield those aggregate tabular results that were published from the 2010 census. Those for which there is only one possible solution are said to have zero solution variability, what we call zero solvar. It's important to recognize that at least 65% of blocks in the 2010 census were zero solvar blocks, meaning 65% of blocks in the nation had one and only one possible solution of reconstructed records. So in these cases, an attacker would not need access to any confidential information to know that they had accurately reconstructed the individual level records, because there's only one possible solution. It's also important to recognize that 935 tracks in the US were composed entirely of zero solvar blocks. So in those cases, there was one and only one possible reconstruction of the entire tract at play. Again, the attacker would know that they had accurately reconstructed all of the records within those geographies. So looking at re-identification statistics for those zero solvar geographies, it's important to recognize that precision is remarkably high. So if you look at those zero solvar blocks for the non-modal and population uniques, they have a precision rate against the commercial data of 91%. Against the CEF, they have a precision rate of 95%. What that means is an attacker would, A, know that they had accurately reconstructed the individual level records, and if they got a match for these population uniques, they would be either 91% or 95% confident that they had accurately re-identified those individuals. So this is something that was very alarming and that we knew that had to be addressed as part of our disclosure avoidance solution. So with that, I am going to pass things over to Rachel and Nicholas to talk about the detailed demographic and housing characteristics file.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks, Alexandra, Matt, and Jason. Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Jones, and I'm the Director of Race, Ethnicity Research and Outreach for our Population Division. Thanks for inviting us to meet with you today. For our part of the session for the 2020 data products, Rachel Marks, Chief of Racial Statistics, and I will provide an update about the Census Bureau's work to develop the 2020 Census Detailed Demographic and Housing Characteristics File A, or the Detailed DHCA, and what you can expect over the coming months. So before we go into the detailed DHCA, first I want to discuss the differences between the disclosure avoidance algorithms that are used to produce the redistricting data the DHC, and the demographic profile, which you're familiar with, and those that are used to produce the detailed DHCA. So as you know, the redistricting data, demographic profile, and DHC use what's called the top-down algorithm, which was developed by the Census Bureau. The detailed DHCA uses a different algorithm, which was developed by Tumult Labs. There's a microdata requirement for the redistricting data for demographic profile and the DHC data products, and when reviewing the microdata, each row represents an individual person or housing unit. These represent the characteristics associated with each person or housing unit, and this is likely how you usually work with data. There is not a microdata requirement for detailed DHCA. Instead, the disclosure avoidance system outputs tabulated data, and each row represents a specific geography. So for example, showing that County X has certain characteristics, and you can't see an individual person or housing unit in the output. The redistricting data, again, the demographic profile and the DHC then undergo post-processing, and this ensures certain consistencies. For example, lines in a table will total. The DAS produces counts for the lowest level of geography and aggregates those counts to get higher level geographies. So for example, all states will add up to the national count. When aggregating data, it will generally get more accurate. The redistricting data is used as input when processing the demographic profile and the DHC, as you've heard, so all the data products are consistent. There are not post-processing requirements for the detailed DHCA. The DAS produces counts for each proposed geography, and states will not add up to the total count. Detailed race and ethnicity groups will not add up to their corresponding regional race or ethnicity group necessarily. So for example, if a data user adds up all of the detailed Middle Eastern or North African or MENA groups, they may get a different count than the published count for the total MENA regional group, which is also part of the detailed DHCA. The same is true when aggregating geographies, for example, adding all counties in a state. Therefore, data users should use caution when aggregating data, such as counties or regional groups, and the data generally will be less accurate than the more data that you aggregate. Instead, you should select the geographic level of interest or the race ethnicity regional group of interest and use those specific statistics that are calculated. The detailed DHCA will not be consistent with redistricting data with demographic profile or DHC data products. And although these inconsistencies can seem illogical, they help to preserve random noise and unbiased estimates in the data product. What's great about the methodology used for the detailed DHCA is that we set margins of error, and these margins of error are met within a 95% confidence interval. We can also communicate these exact margins of error to the public, which is why we're proposing a proof of concept data product to share with the public rather than a demonstration data product like the one that was done for the DHC. The data users do not need to dig through the data to evaluate it, as the margins of error are set in advance, and the proof of concept product will help to show this to the public. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, and she's going to discuss additional aspects of the detailed DHC data product. Rachel?
Thanks, Nicholas, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending where you are. The detailed DHCA will provide population counts and sex and age statistics for approximately 370 detailed racial and ethnic groups and approximately 1,200 American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages. Population counts for detailed racial and ethnic population groups such as German, Lebanese, Jamaican, Chinese, Native Hawaiian, and Mexican, and detailed American Indian and Alaska Native tribal and village populations such as the Navajo Nation will be available in the detailed DHCA. We're also planning to provide statistics on sex by age for selected age categories for detailed racial and ethnic population groups and American Indian and Alaska Native tribal and village population groups that meet certain population thresholds. The detailed DHCA will implement an adaptive design that will allow us to provide more detailed statistics for racial and ethnic groups with larger populations, while at the same time ensuring sufficient confidentiality protections. And we'll talk more about how the adaptive design works in just a moment. Data included in this product are currently proposed to be released for the nation, states, counties, and American Indian and Alaska Native and Hawaiian homeland areas. And based on public feedback, we're also exploring the feasibility of adding places and tracks to this product. We've listened to feedback from data users, and we're prioritizing the release of population counts and sex by age statistics for detailed racial and ethnic groups over some of our other 2020 census data products, like the detailed DHCB and the supplemental DHC. We plan to release the detailed DHCA in August of 2023. As I mentioned, we're proposing to produce the detailed DHCA using an adaptive design. The use of an adaptive design allows us to produce more detailed data for larger population groups and less data for smaller population groups. And this methodology allows us to allocate the privacy loss budget efficiently to provide accurate statistics while protecting respondents' confidentiality. At the national level, population counts are planned to be produced for all racial and ethnic groups and American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages, regardless of their population size. At lower levels of geography, population thresholds will be implemented to determine which population groups are eligible to receive population counts. For all geographic levels, the algorithm will adaptively choose the amount of sex and age statistics that are released. The amount of sex and age data a population group receives will be based on a combination of population thresholds and the level of geography. If a group meets population thresholds to receive age and sex data, they will receive one of three possible tables: a table with 4 age categories, a table with 9 age categories, or a table with 23 age categories. And this approach allows us to produce more data for populations based on their size within a specific geographic area. So how does this work? For some predetermined population groups, SafeTab-P, which is the algorithm used to produce these data, will not use adaptivity. Based on data from the 2010 census, we know that some groups will be too small to receive the sex by age table. Detailed groups with the population smaller than 50 in the 2010 census are preset to receive total population only in the 2020 detailed DHCA. This is determined in advance, and it allows us to spend more privacy loss budget to produce the total population counts for these small populations. For these groups, a differentially private total population count will always be calculated, but no sex and age statistics will be available. For all other population groups, that is, groups that had a population greater than 50 in the 2010 census and groups that we did not collect data for in the 2010 census and had a unique code, like detailed white and black groups, they're eligible to go through the adaptive design. So first, the differentially private 2020 population count is calculated and compared to the predetermined population thresholds for sex and age tables. The population thresholds are used to determine which of the 3 sex by age tables the group meets the population thresholds for, or if the group only meets the population threshold for a total population count only. For the rest of the population groups, we'll use adaptivity. So first, SafeTab-P will calculate the differentially private total population count for each population group using a small portion of the privacy loss budget. Next, it will determine if the population group meets the threshold to produce a total population count only, a sex by age with 4 categories table, a sex by age with 9 categories table, or a sex by age with 23 categories table. And then finally, SafeTab-P will use the remainder of the privacy loss budget to calculate the sex by age data when applicable. And this process will then be repeated for each level of geography. So let's look at an example of how the adaptive design might work for a detailed race group. And this is all hypothetical. So we'll use Japanese alone as our example, which is one of the largest detailed Asian groups. Since the Japanese alone population is one of the largest detailed Asian groups, and we collected data for this group in 2010, it would not be preset to a total population count only, so it would be eligible for adaptivity. So first, SafeTab-P will calculate the total Japanese alone population and compare it to our predetermined population thresholds to determine which sex by age table should be tabulated or if it should only get a population total. For the nation, we can expect that the full sex by age table with 23 categories will be tabulated for the Japanese alone population because of its large size. SafeTab-P will then calculate the differentially private Japanese total population for each state and then compare that to the predetermined population thresholds to determine which sex by age table should be tabulated, or if it should only get a total population count only. So some states like California and Washington, which have larger Japanese population, we would expect them to receive the full sex by age table with 23 categories, in addition to a total population count. States like Pennsylvania and Virginia that have smaller populations would receive the sex by age table with 9 categories and a total population count. States with even smaller Japanese alone populations like Delaware with Wisconsin would receive the sex by age table with 4 categories in addition to a total population count. And some states that have very small Japanese alone populations like North Dakota or Puerto Rico, they might only get a total population count and no sex by age statistics for the Japanese alone population. Only the most detailed sex by age table that a group qualifies for will be produced. We're continuing to test the adaptive design, including implementing population thresholds, and we will provide more updates in our proof of concept product, which Nicholas will speak about next. Nicholas?
Thanks, Rachel. So this coming January of 2023, we plan to produce a prototype demonstration data product. This is what we're calling a proof of concept to show the detailed DHCA and how it works. The proof of concept will use 2010 census data, and the proof of concept will not look like the demonstration data that you might be familiar with from reviewing the redistricting file and the DHC. Instead, we plan to provide parameters such as population thresholds, different levels of geography, and margins of error that data users could expect to see in the 2020 census data DHCA, again using 2010 census data to illustrate this proof of concept. We'll be seeking feedback from the public and engaging with data users, with tribal leaders, stakeholders, and partners on our proof of concept product. We'll be eliciting feedback from the public during the 30-day review period for the proof of concept and encouraging data users to submit feedback to the Census Bureau. This fall, we'll continue our development and testing of the disclosure avoidance methodology for the detailed DHCA, and we'll also be engaging with stakeholders throughout the rest of the year to discuss plans for the detailed DHCA release and the proof of concept. This October, we will be conducting tribal consultations with tribal leaders at the Alaska Federation of Natives annual meeting, and also the National Congress of American Indians annual meeting. We'll continue to engage with external stakeholders, data users, and partners as our plans developed. And as I just discussed, after that in January of 2023, we're planning to release the proof of concept product and provide a 30-day feedback window for data users to share their feedback with us on the proof of concept. Throughout the winter of 2023, we'll be determining the final parameter settings and privacy loss budget as we begin to move into file production and reviewing the data for quality assurance purposes. As Rachel mentioned, we plan to release the detailed DHCA in August 23. So we hope this session has provided you with a detailed update on the detailed DHCA, and we've also posed 3 questions for CSAC members to consider in your discussion. First, what will be helpful to effectively describe the adaptive design of the DHCA that you heard about today? How can we effectively communicate the accuracy of the differentially private data produced in the detailed DHCA? And do you have suggestions for how to effectively engage with data users, with stakeholders, tribal leaders, partners, and the general public about our proof of concept feedback period? Thank you, and we look forward to the discussion this afternoon.
Thanks, Nicholas and Rachel. Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Mather. I'm sort of the outlier here. I'm not with the Census Bureau. I'm with the Population Reference Bureau. And so thanks for the opportunity to join the meeting today. I'm going to describe a series of briefs that PRB is developing in partnership with the Census Bureau. And I want to acknowledge Cynthia Davis Hollingsworth and her team for their help with this work, and also my colleague, Beth Jaros at PRB, who's the lead author for these briefs. Let me take control here. So just to provide some background, many of you know the Census Bureau released a handbook. It was called Disclosure Avoidance for the 2020 Census and Introduction back in November of last year. And that handbook described how the DAS was implemented in the 2020 census redistricting data. The target audience for that handbook and for the briefs that we're developing now is data users who really wanted a high-level understanding of disclosure avoidance modernization, so sort of what they need to know to work with the data. And after releasing that handbook, we collected feedback from the National Advisory Committee on Racial, Ethnic, and Other Populations, the NAC, as well as from CSAC to get their recommendations for future materials. We also gathered information through a targeted data user survey and through some listening sessions at other meetings. And here are some of the common themes that we collected from that feedback. The main one was to keep it short. So ideally, keep these briefs to no more than 6 pages. For reference, the previous handbook was about 37 pages long. It had 8 chapters in it. So for this next series of briefs, the recommendation was to keep these more focused, sort of highlighting key points as opposed to using a narrative type format. Also to make the information practical and easy to understand. We were told to include links for those who might be interested in more detailed information, include more graphics and examples, and especially any equity-focused examples would be useful, and then also to build in adequate time for external review. Some more specific recommendations included providing a concise definition of differential privacy and the disclosure avoidance system, to discuss the total error framework, so not just DAS as a source of error, but also other sources in census data, to address the limitations of differential privacy, explain what's published, such as tables covering age, sex, and race, and therefore variables that are at risk of disclosure, in contrast with things that aren't published, so things like name and birth date and telephone number. To explain the differential privacy in terms of new technical methods that are needed to combat the increased threat of re-identification attacks that Michael was just talking about. And then to describe some real-world impacts for data users. So we are taking a new direction based on this feedback, and we're now in the process of developing these briefs to meet data user needs. We are focusing on topics of interest to data users, building in more time for external review, and we are incorporating more examples and graphics to make the information a little more clear. So here are the briefs that are currently either underway or planned. The first one, we have a target release date this winter, and it's a summary of key points from the previous handbook, and also updated with some new information that we've received since that handbook was published. The second brief, target release, is in the spring of 2023, and it's going to focus on how the Census Bureau selected differential privacy over other disclosure avoidance systems. A third brief, also targeted for the spring, will describe the disclosure avoidance system and framework, really focusing on the top-down algorithm. We'll include a concise definition of differential privacy in that brief. And in fact, in several of the briefs, I think we're planning on including that definition. Also, information that was collected in 2020, what's published and the published data's risk of disclosure. And then what's coming next in terms of the briefs. We'll point ahead to things that are upcoming. So brief number 4, for example, also targeted for the spring, will focus on the demographic and housing characteristics file. That brief will cover how stakeholders are using DHC data generally, implications of disclosure avoidance methods on various various case studies that data users might be interested in, and the implications of disclosure avoidance for those use cases. And then brief number 5 is going to focus on the detailed DHCA. So basically, whereas the earlier brief will have focused on the top-down algorithm, in this one we'll be describing the methods that are being used, how those methods have changed to deal with disclosure avoidance procedures for the DHCA. And then brief number 6 is a little bit different. That one is, some of the data users thought it would be useful if we provided a more comprehensive explanation of kind of the total uncertainty framework surrounding census data. So in this one, we are going to provide highlights from the so-called variability paper. That's the analysis that Census Bureau did, showing the expected data variation for particular geographic areas and populations of different sizes. For example, counties with fewer than 250 people, data will provide examples for data users to show what kind of error they can expect for those geographic areas. And then the degree of error that's introduced with noise infusion, as well as the multiple sources of error outside of disclosure avoidance, with examples of those different sources. And then a little further in the future, 2 other briefs that are in the early planning stages. We have one that will focus on the methods being used for the detailed DHCB product. So those, again, are methods that are non-TDA based processes. And then finally, brief number 8 will focus on the supplemental DHC product, or those household person join products. In terms of the external review process, each brief will have at least 2 external reviewers. We think we'll probably have at least 3 reviewers for each brief. And the reviewers are going to be representing a variety of different external data users, including those focused on the topics listed here. So we have identified experts who are focused on children, demographic issues more broadly, disability, economics and poverty, equity, geography, health, housing, older adults, privacy, and then schools and education issues. And to also have reviewers who are representing different types of organizations. So we have some who are from government agencies, some who are from academia, as well as some who are from the nonprofit sectors. So I believe we have identified about 18 reviewers so far to help us with this task, but we do welcome any feedback from the committee. Are we missing any particular groups that we should include in this process? And if you have any suggestions for specific reviewers, we'd love to hear that. We're reaching out to about 5 or 6 reviewers for each brief, but we don't expect all to have the time availability to help us. So the more folks we can get on the list, the better. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. This is Jay Bright again. I just want to introduce John Shaika, who will be presenting discussion of all of the previous presentations.
Okay, I supposedly have control, but it doesn't seem to be working.
I'll advance, John.
Okay, John Chaika. I want to thank the Census Bureau and the Population Reference Bureau for these very informative and highly detailed presentations. I can only skim the surface in my comments. Next slide. I'd like to offer first some general comments, and then I'll walk through the 4 papers. The demonstration data that the Census Bureau has been producing have been enormously valuable to users, and via the feedback that the Bureau has received to the Census Bureau in tuning their algorithms and making further refinements in what they show to potential users. We've observed before that the Census Bureau has scheduled a relatively short time for feedback of recent products, and I see those same 30 days are scheduled for the proof of concept product. This may have contributed to the small number of responses that the Census Bureau has received for the previous release, and we'll address that in some recommendations. The Bureau's use of a variety of forms of communication, workshops, webinars, blogs, reports about changes in the disclosure avoidance methods has been really important in establishing at least an understanding of these changes and their potential implications. The change in methodology that's being planned for the detailed DHC, however, will require a renewed effort at communication. Next slide. And you can skip to the one after that. With respect to the detailed housing, demographic and housing characteristics file update, the DP working group report, which will be presented tomorrow, is going to address the application of DP to the DHC more broadly. So I'm limiting my comments to what was new in this presentation. And I found the 95th percentile statistics to be a really useful addition to the accuracy metrics that have been released thus far with the demonstration products. Users have wanted more information on the tails, and I hope that we'll see these statistics in the next round of releases. Based on these statistics, I can see that tenure at the tract level looks good. But this is just a single variable with only 3 categories. They're all large, and tracts are fairly uniform in size. By contrast, the couple household type has 2 very large categories for opposite sex and 2 very small categories for same sex. And we see that there are large mean absolute percentage errors. And, excuse me, for these categories at the county level, these raise concern, and the 95th percentile statistics that show 88% and 200% errors at that level really underscore this fact. Next slide. Thanks. For cross-tabulated variables, as was mentioned in the presentation, the usability can be problematic even at the county level. And while I can say that tenure by age of householder looks reasonably good except for the youngest age group, tenure by race of householder appears unusable for all but white alone, except perhaps in the largest counties. Next slide. So I have some draft recommendations which the committee will consider when we meet. One is that the summary metrics for counties, incorporated places, and school districts reflect the low accuracy for smaller areas in general. If it is possible to allocate more of the privacy loss budget to smaller areas within these geographies, and that may not be the case, but if so, we would recommend that the Census Bureau do so. And to communicate to users the wide variation in accuracy that will characterize the published 2020 data, we would recommend that the Census Bureau publish extensive 2010 summary metrics based on the final parameter values. Next slide. So turning to the reconstruction and re-identification attacks on the DHC file. Next slide. This analysis was highly informative. It's one that CSAC members have been interested in seeing. And I noted a couple major things here. One, the table of agreement rates by block size, which shows the accuracy of the reconstruction, shows a dramatic reduction in reconstruction accuracy at the smallest block sizes, but a rather modest reduction for the largest block sizes. And given that reconstruction accuracy actually increases with blocks size, which is not what I would have. Seemingly, one would prefer greater improvement in privacy protection for larger versus smaller blocks. Next slide. The users will want to weigh the reduction in risk against the error introduced into the data. This is the important trade-off. We'll have some discussion of this in the working group report tomorrow. And I would note with regard to this that the confirmed re-identifications declined from 24.8% with the 2010 swapping down to 11.4% with the most recent application of DP. And this compares to 17.2% with the experimental swapping. This is with the commercial data, with the CEF being used as a proxy for the higher quality commercial data. The decline is even more substantial, from 75.5% with the 2010 swapping down to 28.5% with the DP. The Census Bureau has commented in the past on the greater error that a high level of swapping would introduce for the same level of disclosure protection as DP. And while the higher level of swapping that's employed here experimentally doesn't match DP for protection, it would still be informative to see error metrics for this higher level of swapping if it's possible for the Bureau to produce those. Next slide. And then with regard to draft recommendations, the reconstruction results by block size suggest that the current allocation of the privacy loss budget provides comparatively less protection for larger than smaller blocks. And I wonder if that's also true of larger versus smaller areas. These results may be locked in from the redistricting data, but if not, we would recommend that the Bureau assess whether a revised allocation can improve the accuracy of DHC data for smaller areas where we've seen the really concerning errors. In addition, the Census Bureau should produce error metrics for a selected set of DHC tables for the high swapping experiment. This will provide evidence bearing on the Census Bureau's past assertions regarding the choice of differential privacy over enhanced swapping. These would be more informative if the high swapping experiment had produced a higher level of disclosure protection, but nevertheless, they would still be helpful. Next slide. And turning now to the update on the 2020 Census Detailed DHC File A. Next slide. Here, the Census Bureau is taking an entirely different in the application of differential privacy to the detailed DHC data versus what has been done for the redistricting data and the forthcoming detailed housing characteristics data. A lot more discussion of the reasoning behind this choice would really be helpful. The remarks in this presentation about the inconsistencies that are an apparent byproduct of this approach, we think are likely to set off alarms among users who are accustomed to census counts adding up. And after seeing that kind of additivity in the redistricting data and the DHC data, at least within units and separately within persons, I found that the adaptive design really appealing, and I think that other users will as well. It's been an unfortunate consequence of producing the same detail across all domains that you end up with a lot of useless data at small levels of geography or other small domains, and limitations in the detail that can be provided for areas that are large enough to support much greater detail. Next slide. The Census Bureau had a couple of, three questions actually. One, what would be helpful to effectively describe the adaptive design to the detailed DHCA file? And I actually found this description in the presentation to be excellent. It could perhaps be improved with some examples demonstrating the disadvantages of providing the same level of age detail for both large and small designs. The second question is, how can we effectively communicate the accuracy of the differentially private data produced in the detailed DHCA? The margins of error that have been proposed here will be familiar to users, and I'm really happy to see those kinds of metrics. But at the same time, they're not what you've been presenting in the error metrics for the products to date. And I suspect that users will want to get some sense of accuracy for the detailed DHC data expressed in at least some of the same metrics that have been provided previously. Next slide. And the third question was, do you have suggestions for how to effectively engage with data users, stakeholders, tribal leaders, and so on during our proof of concept feedback period? I agree that this will be a challenge, and it's one that will be very important for the Census Bureau to meet. Effective engagement with users may require a lot of the same diverse forms of communication that were used with the DP methodology. And it would be important, I think, for the Bureau to establish what advantages this new methodology offers to offset the inconsistencies that it apparently introduces, and how users can interpret the metrics that are going to be provided. I would also indicate that metrics should address a wide range of uses which reflect different levels of complexity. Next slide. And with respect to draft recommendations, given the user education that's going to be required to explain the new methodology, I would recommend that the Census Bureau devise a schedule that allows a longer period of time, perhaps as much as 60 days for feedback than was allowed for the DHC and has been proposed for the proof of concept. We recognize that this may push things back in terms of the delivery of files, but if you want meaningful feedback, users are going to need time. We find the metrics that are shown here to be very useful, but the Census Bureau should add some of the metrics that are produced for the redistricting and DHC data. This will give users a chance to more readily assess the detailed DHC data in comparison to the earlier products. And in describing the adaptive design, the Bureau should include some examples that demonstrate indeed that there were disadvantages of providing the same level of age detail for both large and small domains. Next slide. And lastly, with respect to the disclosure avoidance briefs, next slide. CSAC made several recommendations coming from its review of the disclosure avoidance document that was released in November 2021. And I'm pleased to see most of these recommendations acknowledged in Mark's presentation and reflected in the proposed briefs. One general recommendation that CSAC provided was to better address the diverse skill and knowledge levels of the varied audiences. Providing these separate briefs provides one way in which the Census Bureau is striving to do that. And I would note that briefs 5, 7, and 8 will provide apparently an in-depth description of the methodology employed in creating the 3 detailed DHC files. And I have a couple of questions about that. One, are the methodologies sufficiently different to require 3 briefs? And in any event, there appears to be a need for at least one additional brief that will address the uses of these files in the same way that the proposed brief 4 will discuss the detailed housing characteristics data. Next slide. There's questions were asked. One, are we missing any data user groups not mentioned? Mark's discussion expanded upon the list that appeared on the slide, and I was just going to point out that your list of user groups focused on subject areas rather than user groups per se, which would include state and local demographers, advocacy groups, academic and private research organizations, and numerous federal agencies, some of which you did mention. Previously, CSAC recommended that the briefs need to address both technical and non-technical audiences. And this would imply that you should include reviewers who are skilled at communicating technical content to non-technical audiences. You also asked, do you have a suggestion for a specific reviewer? J&A talked about this, and CSAC doesn't really have a suitable mechanism for suggesting names, especially in a public forum, and names that may not have been mentioned to the individuals themselves. But it's possible that as a group, we might identify some literature that has been particularly good along these lines and whose authors might be especially well qualified to serve as reviewers. Next and last slide. And with respect to recommendations, recognizing that a brief by definition has a very limited scope, we would recommend that the Census Bureau determine very specifically the target audience for each brief and design the content accordingly. For briefs that have a heavy focus on methodology, we would recommend that the Census Bureau pair a reviewer who is well acquainted with the relevant methods and another reviewer who's more applied in experience and who can represent potential users. In addition to the briefs 5, 7, and 8, which will describe the methodologies that were used in creating the 3 detailed DHC files, we'd recommend that the Bureau produce at least one additional brief that will address uses of these files in the same way that brief 4 is intended to discuss the DHC. And lastly, the discussion of the impact of disclosure avoidance on use cases should provide guidance on fitness for use. This was something we found really valuable in the November 2021 introduction to disclosure avoidance for the 2020 census. I believe that those results cited some work of Tommy Wright in describing how fitness of use could be characterized for certain situations, and we'd really appreciate seeing much broader use of that technique. And with that, I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, John. This is Jay Bright again. That was outstanding. Thanks for covering all that content in your discussion. And in the time remaining, first, do the presenters have any quick responses before we turn to committee discussion? Is there anything burning that you want to respond to? And maybe we could just go in presenter order and give me a yes or no, and then we'll move on to committee discussion.
Jason Devine, no, nothing for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
Matt Spence, nothing from me. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Alexander Cross, nothing from me.
Would it be Rachel next?
Pause.
I think Michael also said no.
Sorry, I said I wanted to thank John, and I said no response.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Jay, thanks to the comments from John. We look forward to the discussion.
Great.
Yeah, nothing from me. Just thank you for that great feedback. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, John. Regarding the possibility of combining some of those briefs into one, I think that's a good suggestion, and one that I think I'll have to have a conversation with Census Bureau staff to see if the methods are similar enough that would make sense, or if we need to split them out. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thanks very much. Thanks again, John. This is Jay Bright again. So CSAC members, if you have a question or comment, please put your hands up. And I'll just repeat for the benefit of everyone that tomorrow our differential privacy working group will also have a presentation which will cover some of the same content. So we'll have other comments and recommendations. And I see Lance Waller has his hand up. So Lance, please.
Thanks, Jake. This is Lance Waller, CSAC. And thanks, John, for the summary of the comments and for all the presenters. This is just a little bit of a follow-up on the briefs. I really like the idea of focusing them. I was wondering if there's been some discussion, and maybe this is just further down the road, in terms of dissemination. It'd be great to have them to be easy to find for users. And I know the Bureau has worked really hard on the data.census.gov and making the data elements easy to find. And I kind of, just a personal recommendation, and we'll discuss with the committee as well. It'd be great to make it hard work to miss them. Let me put it that way. Sometimes some of the information in the briefs is really important, but we need to get a setting where that's a place people look for the information. I do think the bite-sized, or a little bigger than bite-sized, and the different levels that are clearly identified at different levels, I want it to be the place people start with these questions. And so just wonder if you have some dissemination plans for the collection of briefs And one addendum on that, the demonstration product name has now become a thing. People identify a demonstration product for 2010. In the proof of concept, I think the term will become something. So I think those names are important, and maybe having briefs on the types of, because the demonstration product for 2010, I think, will live on for quite a while because it has both types of disclosure avoidance, and people continue to look into that. So I think those, whether they were intended as official names or not, it's good to treat them as so. And again, information that should be hard to miss would be my recommendation. So any thoughts on the dissemination of them? It was my question in addition to the comments. Thanks.
Thanks. And Cynthia, I don't know if you want to talk more about that.
Sure. Hi, this is Cynthia Hollingsworth, Census Bureau. Thank you for that feedback. And yes, we are working on a full plan, release plan of both the naming of the briefs, the location, how we would link those briefs to the data. And to your point, they would be extremely hard to miss.
Okay, thanks. I had no doubt there was a plan in place, but yeah, I find them very useful. So I want to make sure that they're where we can see them. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for that point.
Thank you. And I'll turn it to Gwen for her question. And just a reminder, please state your name when you state your question.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gwen Evans Lomiespa. Thank you, everybody, for these great presentations. They were really informative. I have many questions, but I'm going to focus first on my question for Nicholas Jones and Rachel Marks's presentation, particularly talking about the adaptive design. I'm just curious how it's going to work with the tribal geographies, given that many might have populations below 50. So is it when it works with those populations, is it primarily just going to show the total race ethnicity population in detail, or will it be able to, I guess, how are you adapting for those?
Hi, this is Rachel Marks. Thanks, Gwen, for your question. So the way that the adaptive design works across all geographies below the state level is the same, and also for AIN areas that cross state boundaries as well. So for pod counts, regardless of size at the national and state level, all groups will get a pod count, and that's the same as in the 2010 census. So all tribes, regardless of what their size is, we know that many tribes have counts that are smaller than 50. Many have counts of 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. They will get counts at the national and state level. And then for the adaptive design, how it works is that AINH areas and all other levels of geography will all have the same population thresholds. And we will share those population thresholds. We're still testing them right now and tweaking them as we review our test data, but we will share those in the proof of concept and ask for feedback on that. So we do definitely look forward to your feedback about those population thresholds and if they need to be adjusted even further for tribal areas.
Thank you. And I realize we're right at time, but we've got a couple more questions. So Kunal?
Yes. Yeah. So thanks for the great presentations. I had a question, I guess, kind of for Michael. So I guess when like an online website asks for your date of birth, the responses they get end up being very concentrated on January 1st. And I guess this is because people don't trust the website to necessarily protect their information, right? So I guess what I'm getting at is, like, if there is a real or if people think that their privacy, if their data is not going to be protected, they may misreport, and that can cause not just inaccuracy, but kind of very significant bias in future censuses and all other data that the Census Bureau collects. And I guess this seems like something that's very hard to model. So I guess my question is, like, and I guess I have no idea if there is any way to do this, but is there some way to kind of model how let's say a putative risk number that of the kind that Michael presented translates to accuracies or future biases in censuses. Because I guess if we did have such a thing that would allow the DCEP to it would make it easier to make this trade-off between privacy and utility or fitness for use. Yeah, so I guess my question is there any effort to model this sort of indirect impact?
So this is Michael Hawes. Great question. I don't think we have focused that extensively on linking kind of putative rates to anticipated impact on response. We have looked at attitudes about privacy and attitudes about confidentiality protection as they relate to likelihood of responding. That was part of the CBAMS, the Census Barriers, Attitudes, and Motivators study, where we were looking at individuals' concerns about how well their data would be protected and concerns about different data elements, also broken down by various demographic characteristics. Excuse me. But I think what you're talking about would be taking that kind of analysis substantially further. I think one challenge in doing that would also be like the putative rates, for example, are just one possible measure, and they're based on certain assumptions about what an attack would look like. And so were we to use different starting assumptions, like those rates would be different, and the model would thus be different as well. But it's certainly worth considering, and we'll look forward to discussing that further with you down the road.
Thank you. This is Jay Bright again. I realize I misspoke. We're not quite at time. We go to 11:35. So, Seth?
Well, that's good. And I think my question might be a 2-minute question, because it's more of just a sort of meta comment, I think. So, I really enjoyed all the presentations. When Matt was talking, he used the phrase acceptable errors, or said, we don't like it when the story changes. And the conversations about adaptive design, about sort of adaptive thresholds for population, thought about sort of, like what the right population thresholds should be. One of the things that I think would be helpful with communications and also like help us understand how systems are performing is to have like clearly stated targets, like what is acceptable, like how much noise is too much noise. And when you make these population trade-offs, you're explicitly sort of making a decision about how much noise, is acceptable. And I think having clearly stated targets, like we would like to publish data that meets this criteria. And that criteria might not be the same for all cases, and there may be some nuance, but having clearly stated data quality criteria, I think would really help with the communication about adaptive, about sort of everything, and understanding that those criteria embed within them trade-offs about how much, about privacy, about utility, about other things. But clear criteria, I think, would really help and would give you a way to evaluate what you're doing as well. That's my kind of comment. Thanks. Does that make sense?
It does. This is Matt Spence. That does absolutely make sense. I'm trying to think of whether I need to necessarily respond to that. I think you're exactly right. I mean, we did, when we were initially coming up with the ideas of DHC and what we'd like to see, we did formulate some internal targets, but it's hard to sort of wrap your mind around what is acceptable a priori, right? Sort of without seeing the data. Is 5 good or not? Well, it depends, right? It depends. I mean, like, so we mentioned things like the county level coupled household type, right? And the 95%, 95th percentile absolute error was 15 for opposite sex married couple households and 9 for same sex married couple households. Now, 15 and 9 for 95% of counties seems like pretty decent numbers. And so that's, that would naturally be a target that we would think about. But perhaps in a situation, and as we saw, and when I spoke about the character of a county not necessarily changing, I typically think of like looking at relative shares of the population, because I don't typically look and say, well, how many, homeowners are there who are Black alone? How many homeowners are there who are white alone? I'm thinking of like the Black homeownership rate. I'm thinking of what proportion of a county is opposite sex married couple household versus a householder living alone or something like that, a different kind of household type, a family household versus a non-family household. And so what we've another way to look at the data that I didn't go into is that we actually tabulate the results and see where do the sort of stories of a particular place change. We did a tribal consultation earlier where we were diving into, for example, Ketchikan area, and looking at household type. Even though it was a small area, even though you might look at the errors for absolute error, you might look at the mean absolute percent error and feel like those may not meet the target. When you look at how the relative shares of the population looked, the most common household type was married couple household, and the second most common type was householder living alone, and the least common type was male householder, no spouse present. And that's just, that was just before differential privacy or after. The same story. So that's another way that we look at it. And that doesn't necessarily
totally
get
get
captured neatly in a target.
I think any threshold is going to have to be is it going to have to be sort of relative, right? Like either some kind of like CV threshold or relative kind of absolute error, like the percentage kind of absolute error, in order to be generalizable. Otherwise it becomes a rabbit hole and impossible. But I do think having those targets would be, I don't know, it would help in a variety of ways in my view. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. This is Jay Bright again. I want to close out this session with a reminder that tomorrow we will be talking about differential privacy again in the feedback from our differential privacy working group. So some of these topics will be touched on again, but one that won't be touched on is the communications and dissemination outreach portion. So I just wanted to say one more time, thanks very much to Mark and Cynthia for their presentation. It was extremely responsive to the recommendations from CSAC at the spring meeting. So that was great to see, as John Chaika also pointed out. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Tommy Wright.
All right, Jay. A sincere thanks to Jason, Matthew, Alexandra, Michael, Nicholas, Rachel, Mark, and John, and everyone for a very lively discussion. There's a great deal of information. Thank you very much, everyone. It's now time for a 10-minute break, so can we return at 1:50? Does that sound all right? 1:50. Thank you very much. Hello, Eloise. Hi.
Hey, Tommy, how are you?
Oh, just fine. How are you?
Good. It's been an interesting series of sessions this morning. I've
I
appreciated
tell you,
it.
yes,
Yeah.
information packed. I went through all the presentations yesterday, and I was quite saturated with it.
Well,
a lot here in these topics.
yeah.
Tommy, this is Shauna.
Yes.
Before we begin, just an announcement for the public. If you are viewing the slide deck on YouTube, we are continuing to work on our technical issues. There is a link below the window that has all of the presentations posted there, so you may follow along there if issues continue.
You gonna make that? I guess you've already made it.
She already made it. We can begin.
Okay.
Before we begin, I just want to confirm that Kira Lindsay and Gary Benedetto are on. Are you all on with camera?
I'm here.
I see them.
Okay.
Tommy, go ahead. You can restart the meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much, and welcome, Tommy Wright. Welcome back, everyone. Let's welcome now Eloise Parker, Gary Benedetto, and Kara Lentz, who will present Improving Disclosure Protections on the Current Population Survey Public Use File. There is a discussant, Claire Bowen, and a committee discussant as well. Eloise?
Thank you, Tommy. Good afternoon. My name is Eloise Parker, and I am the Assistant Director for Demographic Programs. I work for Tori Velkoff at the Census Bureau. Thank you for this opportunity to provide an update on the Census Bureau's plan for ensuring the confidentiality of the current population survey public use file. Over the course of this year, we've been privileged to engage with the CPS PUF data user community through sessions such as this and through the solicitation of written feedback through that this summer. The feedback that we've received has informed adaptations to our initial proposal, which was originally released last January, in a manner that has allowed us to protect the PUF while minimizing impacts on the utility of this important data source. We are in the process of making a last round of refinements in anticipation of releasing a plan this fall, and especially appreciate having this forum with you as we approach this point. I am joined by two colleagues today. Gary Benedetto is the Census Bureau's Assistant Division Chief for the Center for Enterprise Dissemination Disclosure Avoidance, and he will walk through a hybrid suppression modeling approach developed to protect geographies at population levels where we found disclosure vulnerabilities. Kira Lindsay is the Census Bureau's Survey Director for the current population survey, and she'll be discussing with you an updated proposal for rounding wages that incorporates feedback received from the CPS PUF data user community and other stakeholders over the course of this year. Kira will also provide information on our next steps for releasing a final plan in anticipation of phasing in these changes starting in 2023. As you know and appreciate, the Census Bureau is obligated by federal law to ensure data are protected from disclosure, and specifically that no individual respondent can be identified in the data released to the public. There was much discussion about this very topic earlier today. As you also know, the amount of data available and the technologies and the methods to match them have made it more and more challenging to meet that obligation. The CPS PUF is no exception to these challenges, and in 2020, the Census Bureau conducted a rigorous re-identification study on the PUF, and we found that there were vulnerabilities to disclosure in select geographies with populations of less than 250,000. The established disclosure protection on the CPS PUF was to suppress geographies with populations of less than 100,000, clearly no longer sufficient. So in January of this year, the Census Bureau announced plans to apply more rigorous protection to the file. The CPS PUF user community expressed a number of concerns about how that plan would impact the utility of the file in general, but particularly given the pandemic and the centrality of the CPS PUF to understanding dynamics in the labor economy. Users expressed concerns about the additional geographic suppression, but there were some other concerns as well. And these included a decision by the Bureau to replace the PUF household identifier, which would preclude year-over-year analysis, and doing so at a particularly sensitive time for the US economy, given the pandemic and associated stressors. Plans for rounding data on usual weekly earnings and usual hourly earnings were considered overly constraining with regard to analysis on wage growth and potentially compromising inputs for tools like the Atlanta Federal Reserve Wage Tracker. And then, of course, we were going to need time to apply the new methods, which were going to have an effect on delaying the release of the PUF at that time. So in light of those concerns, the Census Bureau committed to take another look at its plans and find a way to avoid this level of impact on the data user community. The changes were deferred and the PUF was released on its usual schedule. Nonetheless, the disclosure risks are real. And while the Census Bureau believes that the revised plan shared today will have less impact on the data, there is no option that allows us to sidestep the need for additional protection. Through discussion with you today, we are confident we can strike the right balance between these two needs. And with that, let me turn the mic over to Gary Benedetto to walk through the proposal. Gary, you want to grab control of the slides?
Yep. All right. All right. Can everyone hear me all right? All right, great. All right, so let me see, I guess I need to advance here. All right. So as Eloise mentioned, the traditional way of handling geography in the CPS public use file was to suppress geographies with populations less than 100,000. But there was this re-identification study that we conducted internally that identified concerning vulnerabilities for geographies below 250,000. So we were trying to figure out an approach that would allow us to not suppress under 250,000, but to give the data users the same level of detail they had historically, while also addressing this vulnerability. There's also a proposal here that Kira will talk about later for rounding wages and earnings, and we've decided we could be a little bit less aggressive than the initial proposal, because while we don't want the precision of wages and earnings to essentially act as an identifier in and of itself, the precision of earnings wasn't the driver behind the vulnerability in the re-identification study. It was really the small geographies. So I thought in explaining the mechanics of what we propose to do, it would be helpful to have a little toy example. So this is a hypothetical state, AA, and here are 9 geographies that might be in this state, as defined by a geographic identifier and metropolitan status. And as you can see, most of these are larger than the 250,000 and are unaffected, but, or I'm sorry, larger than the 100,000 and are unaffected in the old PUF, but the old public use file would suppress 4 of these geographies, geography 4, 7, 8, and 9, because they fall under the 100,000 mark. As you can see, the combination of the suppressed geography identifier and the metropolitan status still allows 2 areas here of GeoID 0 metro and 0 identifier non-metro. If we were to continue with suppression now go to the 250,000 threshold, we can see in this example it has a very large impact. So areas 5 and 6 fall below the 250,000 would also now have to be suppressed. But we also have this problem where areas 8 and 9 combine to still be less than 250,000, and we would also have to suppress those and lump them all together. So we were trying to figure out a way to allow the data user to continue to have the same level of detail they have had. And the approach we've decided on is a partial synthesis approach. So the idea here is that we would estimate a multinomial logistic regression predicting which small geography a house is in based on the characteristics of the householder and the household. And we would run a separate regression for every state. So no household would move out of state. Just which small geography within a state would be perturbed. And so only households that fall into these small geographies would be affected. And we would try to take a data-driven approach to this model. So we would basically throw in all the explanatory variables that we can think of as potential variables in this regression and let the data determine the most important relationships with robust statistical methods. So returning to our list of geographies that I showed before, to return to the level of detail that we had in the old public use file, the dependent variable in this regression would take on the 4 values here that are colored. So 0 metro, 5 metro, 6 metro, and 0 non-metro. And everybody who falls into those geographies would receive a synthetic value, and the data user would now have that same level of detail when they use the microdata. And if we've done a good job of modeling and preserving the relationships, it should have a much smaller impact on the covariate relationships that the data user is interested in. So expanding this example and pretending we have some fake microdata records here that fall into this state. These are 9 microdata records, and you can see the first 6 fall into the geographies that were too small. I'm sorry, the first 5 fall into geographies that were too small in our example. Now, the old public use file suppression, or the suppression technique, but with the new threshold of 250,000, would suppress all of these geos, as we said before, to GeoID 0 and unidentified metropolitan status. With the partially synthetic approach, they will now be replaced by values you would have seen in the old public use file approach honoring the 100,000 threshold. But things will have been mixed up a bit. Now, there's nothing in this approach that says we can't predict the actual value. So sometimes the model will predict the original actual value that we saw. But other times the model will predict values that we didn't see, and this uncertainty is what's going to provide the prediction for geographies under 250,000. So what are the implications to the data user? Well, all analyses at the state and higher level, so if you don't include geography in your analysis, those aren't going to be affected at all. Okay, absolutely no variable except for the geography is changing. Any analysis that conditions on geographies with populations greater than 250 won't be affected. What will be affected is analyses that condition on geographies with population below 250,000. And this means that analyses that condition on non-metropolitan status in states where this distinction causes the geographies to fall below the 250,000 will also be affected. But it's also important to remember that the alternative here is suppression, and that will also impact those analyses and potentially in a much worse way, because typically people will drop these observations from their regression analyses or what have you, and that will lead to bias. So now I will pass it off to Kira to talk about rounding.
Thanks, Gary. Hello, my name is Kira Lindsay. I'm the survey director for CPS, and I'm here to talk to you about some of the other components to the confidentiality. Because we're doing this modeling and suppressing some of the geography, the wage and earning rounding can be extremely minimal to remove just the very unique wages. And what you see on your slide is the originally proposal that we put out in June for the rounding of hourly wages. If you reference the paper that we also provided, the weekly rounding is provided in there. But as Eloise mentioned in the beginning, we've gotten extensive comments already, and we are refining our rounding approach. Currently, we are leaning towards rounding at a much more rounding at the minimum level of 5 cents to a much more extended upper bound in order to accommodate the ever-growing minimum wages. We are also looking into the weekly rounding to try to bring that better in line with the hourly wages so that they can be compared easier. On top of that, we are currently planning to do a dynamic top code at the top 3% of all wages reported. Right now, we have a static one that was set quite a while ago and so is no longer in date. We're also proposing adding a federal minimum wage flag that will indicate if the original reported wage was below the federal minimum wage. As part of some of those comments, we just wanted to point out that we got an independent analysis from the Atlanta Federal Reserve on their wage tracker. They published this in their macro blog on 7/13 and determined that the wage rounding would have very minimal impact on the tracker. And here is the graph here. In orange was our original proposal back in January. In gray is the current proposal. And then the unrounded is the blue that is, as you can see, very, very much in line with the gray. So you can only see it partly. And that is what we had been reporting. So the implementation, some of the feedback we got is that we were not going to phase in because, as you know, CPS is a longitudinal survey and it was going to take quite a while. We believe that the use of the data is more important, so we will be phasing these in 1 month at a time, starting in January. This will allow for no break-in series. We will take an entire 16 months to fully phase in this way, but we think that this is better for the data users. So far, we've talked to CSAC. We've also did a webinar and had open public comments off of our website. And then obviously we are presenting here today at CSAC. And we welcomed comments all through July, originally to the general public. So what are our planned next steps? Well, we're asking for recommendations. We've already received, we're using to assess the potential refinements that I noted in my earlier slide. And then, of course, we are very much looking forward to yours. Originally, the final plan was supposed to be released in late September, but once we realized that CSAC was a little bit later than that, we're going to push it back into October because we believe your comments are going to be very valuable in the refinement. So we plan on hopefully still doing it by the end of October. And then the targeted implementation, though, will stay the same for the January data release, which is actually in February. So to that end, we had some questions. And did they not make it? Yes. So here are the questions. In refining our plans and improving protection of the CPS public use file, the Census Bureau has carefully considered feedback As you consider them, do you note any impacts to the utility of the PUF that may not have already been accounted for by any other data users? And then are there other stakeholder groups that beyond what we've already engaged the Census Bureau to which you recommend we reach out? Thank you very much for your time. I look very much forward to your recommendations.
Thank you very much. This is Jay Bright, and I just want to introduce Claire McCabe-Owen, who will be the CSAC discussant.
Can everyone hear me? I don't have control, it looks like, and this is actually my second slide.
Can you take control?
I don't have any control right now.
Claire, I'll advance the slides.
All right, thank you so much, Helen. So before I begin, I'm going to apologize ahead of time again. I caught a cold. It is not COVID. I tested multiple times. I just apparently got whatever is going through the United States right now of the flu. So I'll try to do my very best to be as engaging and exciting as ever, but it's going to be a little hard because I'm losing my voice already. So thank you so much. I want to also begin with, I thank the CPS group. It's very, very difficult to balance the needs of privacy protections and utility and trying to engage with user groups to make sure that everyone is happy, even though at the end of the day, you're going to make probably nobody happy, but try to make a few, right? So next slide, please. So we just already heard what were some of the questions that the group has, and I kind of wanted to focus on these for my discussing questions because they really guided some of the other additional questions I have and maybe suggested feedback to go think about on how they're going to move forward with a disclosure avoidance system. Next slide, please. So the big thing is that they're looking at partially synthetic data. So I kind of grouped some of the questions into three parts. So the first one being methodological questions. I've still heard some labor economists are concerned about the wage analysis quality. And so really wanting to know what are the considerations that determine that wage rounding rules are sufficient before the disclosure risk and usefulness. And so that would be nice to see a little bit more details about what made those determinations, what is considered the being too disclosive or not. Though after hearing the members of the CPS team heard that rounding is being updated even further, so that's very promising. So next slide, please. So digging down into the partially synthetic data. So this is a new thing with trying to figure out the issues between the population sizes between 100,000 and 250,000. So one of the big things that I was wondering about was the model selection and the post-processing and how those aspects of any synthetic data generation really impact quality of the data. So they talked about a multinomial logistic model, but what other models are being tested? So it's interesting, last week I just came back from the Privacy and Statistical Databases Conference where a lot of the presented papers were on doing synthetic data and they were focusing doing CART models. And so that's why I'm wondering if there was other models that were considered from this group and what was the determination of which one was better. Was that some evaluation metric considerations or was there some computational power limitations because that can kind of eliminate a few different synthetic data generation modeling. Also, the last thing is that any kind of constraint issues when you generate that partially synthetic data, because sometimes when you generate it, the values could fall outside what's possible or feasible within the data set. And if so, how are those being handled? Because depending on how you handle those, you could have different kind of biasy issues that could arise up. Next slide, please. So this goes into the second bucket of kind of questions I have that this has been a running thing for, I think, for most of all the DAS updates for the Census Bureau, which is knowing what is what we consider the gold standard or for utility metric or disclosure risks. This is really tricky because you can't, again, make everyone happy. You can't consider everything for the thousands upon thousands of users who will use the data. But knowing what are the metrics that the Census Bureau are prioritizing over others will be nice to know, at least considering the impacts of other kind of analyses that people might want to do that are outside the scope. So in particular, what are those metrics for assessing the quality of the data and what are those disclosure risks? And if those metric values can be reported, could it be compared to previously proposed disclosure protection updates? Maybe it's not possible given that it could be too disclosive to present both what the results are for the past update or the past system or the current system. So I fully acknowledge that that's a problem. Next slide, please. So we've heard that the alternative of doing this partially synthetic approach or some of the other updates is to do full suppression. So this could also be another quality assessment for data users to think about. So given that suppression is the alternative, are any of the results of the proposed but better than if it was suppressed data? And to most people, that would seem like, yeah, that should be the case, right? It's getting some data is better than getting no data. But what if the alternative being that it's what you release is so noisy or whatever you modeled, it is actually better not to have access to that data because maybe the noise will misinform and lead you to make an improper decision. And so it'd be nice to kind of see what is possible when you your analysis on the suppressed data versus the otherwise. And I think this will be more encouraging and help data users to feel comfortable about the changes made. So in the next slide, please. So the other bucket of questions I thought about was looking at some previous notes. Again, I'm a new member of CSAC, so I haven't been participating in the other meetings. So one of the things that has been flagged before is like how the response quality has changed and using administrative records to assess that quality. Given that now we're trying to move away from the pandemic, so what has been changed since the start of it? So it'd be nice to know those kind of impacts. Next slide, please. And that goes into disentangling uncertainty, which is it's easier said than done, right? But I think a lot of people will say, oh, all this noise is all because of privacy protections, but there's other kinds of certainty that comes in place, the sampling, the modeling, so on and so forth. So I'm wondering if there is a way to possibly quantify that uncertainty, see how it propagates in the data. But again, easier said than done. It's hard to handle. Final slide, I think, or the next slide. So some draft suggestions. So disseminating more details on the disclosure protection methodology and utility metrics, if possible. I read through the white paper, and this is why I had these questions, because I didn't quite get them answered through those for that dissemination. I understand that everything is still really tentative, though. So once you make the final proposal, it'd be nice to see all that dissemination materials. Other thing is the reporting of the uncertainty when conducting the data quality evaluation, if possible, because like again, as I said, there's different kinds of uncertainty that comes from releasing the puff. Next slide, please. So this kind of goes more targeted into your last question, which is trying to figure out like other stakeholder groups to engage in. So saying like creating an independent group or maybe engaging with another group to assess the quality CPS, just kind of getting another perspective, right? Because sometimes you might be analyzing through the data a little too long and not see like for the forest for all the trees, right? Sometimes that's not feasible, so it might be nice if the Census Bureau could provide more specific examples that demonstrates that usefulness, like that fitness for use that we've been hearing about. That would be great. Some other groups I was thinking about that potentially that CPS could engage with are people who use the CPS or help disseminate this CPS. So thinking about the National Bureau of Economic Research, so thinking about more of the labor economists that are trying to engage those, given the concerns about the waging round. And then University Consortium for Political and Social Research, the big consortium of or holder of lots of different data sets, including the CPS, and helping other people get access to it. And thinking about some more of the nonprofit areas of like Pew Research or Tax Policy Center, who are also use the CPS for a lot of different kind of analysis and public policy decision making. So those are a few of the suggestions I have there. Thank you for, again, your patience as I try to speak through this, and happy to clarify anything if anybody on the CPS team have questions for me.
Great, thank you very much, Claire. This is Jay Bright again, and maybe before we turn to committee discussion, we could go back to some of Claire's questions for the CPS team. If you have any quick responses, I don't know if you were able to get those jotted down, but there were a few specific questions about alternative methods that were used and a few others. If you have any reactions.
So I apologize. My dog is barking in the background, but
I thought all of the suggestions on evaluation were outstanding. I agree with them wholeheartedly, we're in that state. We're getting to that stage now where we're starting to evaluate, and I think we will try to do all of those things. I might not have the most satisfactory answer on the choice of the multinomial logistic regression, but I think it was a little bit of this is what we can get up and running pretty soon. We do have, we have been, as you know, doing some stuff with decision trees and cart models elsewhere in the Bureau, and that is something we could potentially explore as we improve this going into the future. So.
Great, thank you. Any other responses from me?
I don't think I have anything else to add, but when coming up with the rounding, the original rounding proposal was based on sort of general data disclosure rules that we have within the Census Bureau. And the nice thing is, as Gary said, that we, while wage disclosure, specific wages wasn't really the heart of why we thought the identification was at risk, it is something that can be extremely unique. And so it does allow us to have a little bit more flexibility because it is not the primary risk, and hence why we can take comments and try to match the data users. What we're doing is we're bringing proposals to the full data review board that is at the Census Bureau and discussing them and, going from, well, that's too extreme to that's doable kind of thing. And weighing the risk versus the data user need.
Yeah, I don't have much to add either, other than Claire, we very, very much appreciate your thoughtfulness and those very meaty suggestions. From my vantage point, all of the household surveys that we do, both for census and for the other federal statistical agencies that look to the Census Bureau to support their data collection efforts, are, we're really at kind of an inflection point in terms of change and, thinking about Director Santos and Deputy Director Jarman's remarks earlier this morning, finding the bridge that we need to build between these surveys, the disclosure being one dimension of them, right? But I'm looking forward to future conversations that we can have with you all as we kind of adapt and make sure that we're ahead of these changes that are going on. So thank you for that and for the continuing support.
Thank you. So this is Jay Bright again. So it's open for CSAC discussion. Anyone wants to jump in? So Kunal has a question. Go ahead, Kunal.
Hi. Yeah, so thanks for the great presentations. I guess my question was, it sounded to me like we are still going to suppress the geographies for geographies smaller than 100,000. So I guess my question is, if we did have formal privacy methods, for example, of the kind you were using, one could imagine kind of increasing the utility of the data by also generating synthetic data for smaller geographies. Is that something that you have considered, evaluated? And I guess, is that something that the user community thinks would be useful?
I'm not sure who's supposed to answer that, but I'll jump in. I agree. I think we could potentially synthesize the even more detail. And I think the goal here at first was just to recreate the same level of detail that has historically been there, so that we're not breaking time trends or in analyses.
Thank you. Other questions? And Barbara, please.
Yes, thank you. That was really interesting, and I've been very eager to find out more about this. And so what I see here is a lot of progress. I'm wondering a little bit more about the synthetic estimates, and wondered if you could just say a little more. Whether they, how much protection they provide, whether people can actually somehow. I guess I would like to hear just a little more, and how much, for example, you're going to release about the way that those were estimated. Maybe that's my question, really.
So I don't know that I totally have the answer on how much we're going to release about how they were estimated. I think that probably will have to involve some more internal discussions. I will say that this is not a differential privacy or a formal privacy approach. So it's a little hard to answer the how much are they protecting. I think the general philosophy behind synthetic data is that you're taking a random draw from a properly estimated distribution, and so that there's some plausible deniability, right? That any particular value is a real value, and you're touching every record, right? It's not a light touch method like perhaps swapping might be. I don't know if that totally addresses your question, but yeah, we'll have to do analyses on accuracy, and we could potentially see how it impacts re-identification studies as well. These are all things we could do.
Yeah, thanks. I just find this interesting, and I hope it works. I truly do, because as a solution, it has a lot of appeal. So thank you very much.
Claire, it looks like you had a comment.
Yes, I realize this is my next question might be a little too in the weeds, and it might have to be answered like in the future after you figure out your modeling. So because you're doing some synthetic data generation, at least partially, I'm kind of curious whether or not you're thinking about doing multiple syntheses or not, because there are some theory to support partial synthetic data for multiple releases, but then there was also a few more papers coming out about the importance of just doing a single release. So I'm just a little curious about that. Again, this might be too in the weeds and something that I'm just thinking about as a researcher in this area.
Yeah. I mean, as someone who's been involved in it as well, I'm always partial to the multiple draws as well for, variance estimation. I think it's certainly something we can do in the background for our own internal sort of analyses. I suspect it's not something that, and I'll defer to Eloise and Kara on this, I suspect it's not something they want to do for production purposes.
I imagine that's going to be a little difficult for some data users to know how to combine the estimates or the variances.
So I would say that that's true.
So this is Jay Bright again. I actually have a question, maybe a pretty naive one. So when you do the synthetic generation of the geography, do you envision any post-processing that says, okay, we know that for the original geography, you have certain characteristics that could be summarized, but after synthesis, you broke that a little bit. And do you envision any post-processing to fix it up a little bit, knowing that that is somewhat disclosive? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does. I don't think we have envisioned any post-processing right now, but I think we're also in the early stages of the evaluation. So I think if the evaluation were to turn up some very unsatisfactory results on things that of importance, then I think there's a lot on the table that we could consider there. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions from CSAC? So I'm not currently seeing any, but could you just repeat the timeline? So next steps here.
The timeline for our timeline?
Yeah,
Or
your
the
timeline,
timeline
sorry.
for the agenda?
Yeah.
So we're,
Go ahead, Laura. No, go ahead.
So we're looking for your recommendations, and we're going to look through all of your thoughts, and I jotted down a few things from the questions, and so we're hoping to put out a sort of final plan in order just to commit to development and evaluation by the end of October, and that should allow data users time to prepare any adjustments they may need to make to their analysis programs. We are currently thinking that we will implement our first month. Like I said, we're phasing in the January data release, which is actually February. But obviously, if we find anything during our evaluation that we are worried about, we will pause that until we are sure that there's a certain levels of certainties. There was a lot of questions about documentation. We are going to try to put as much as we can into our usual technical documentation we put out with our user file for people to reference when we finally start the phasing process.
And the month by month rotating in is matching up with the CPS rotating panel design. So you just kind of ease in, and after the full rotation is complete, it's fully implemented.
Yeah, and that's why it's going to take so long. That's why
Gotcha. Yep. No, that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Yep.
Are there other questions or comments? Yeah, Kunal, please.
Yes, one other comment. So I guess there is by now a bunch of techniques for synthetic data generation with differential privacy, and I guess the kind of models you're training where we're essentially just training a multinomial heuristic regression model. That's something that you can actually do fairly accurately, and I would imagine at like a 250,000 data point scale, you would probably be able to do it essentially with the same utility with privacy as you do without. So I guess, yeah, my question is, have you considered those approaches, or what are the considerations that you would use to decide what to use?
So I can take a stab at that. We currently have a cooperative agreement with some very well-known researchers in academia to try to figure out how to do differential privacy correctly with sample surveys. Sample surveys present a really big problem to differential privacy because of the sensitivity with the sort of data-dependent sampling that we sometimes do, and the post sampling weight adjustments that we do. This sensitivity becomes basically arbitrarily large for most things. So we're not there yet, but that research is happening, and if it turns up good methods that could be applied to, say, synthesis or imputation, those certainly will be explored for.
Oh, you're muted. It looks like you're speaking.
I was just saying thanks. Okay.
Couldn't tell if Kunal was in mid-comment or not just then.
Oh, sorry.
This is Tom. I think he said he was saying thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was just saying thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Kunal. Could I have a follow-on question about the differential privacy within a sampling context? Completely naive question. So is the privacy protection given that someone knows you're in the sample, or is it unconditional?
I mean, those are the kinds of philosophical discussions that are happening, but both are very complicated, and especially when the sampling has some data dependence in it, which a lot of our surveys do. We typically think that there's a secrecy of the sample benefit, and that has been shown for simple random samples to differential privacy. But in some of these different data-dependent sampling schemes, it's also been shown that there's actually privacy reduction with and this is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse here as well. So I don't know if I'm communicating this accurately, but it's complex either way. And for longitudinal surveys, one has to philosophically, you might have to wonder which of those regimes makes sense, because you could potentially have a divorce during the course of a panel survey, and somebody really know with certainty that someone else that they want to know about is in the survey. So
and then with CPS specifically, do you still do the little clusters of housing units that you work your way through as you refresh the sample, or is that, you know what I'm talking about?
I'll let Kira answer that.
Yeah, we still do some clustering for interviewing purposes. It's not as small as it used to be, but yes, there is still some clustering.
Thank you. Lance, looks like you've got your hand up.
Trying to figure out, okay, I've got sound and video on. So Lance Waller, CSAC. Kind of building on Jay and Claire's and some of these points, a lot of times I hear people talking about synthetic data or differential privacy, and they're sort of contrasting things there. And what I'm hearing from you, which is pretty interesting, is somehow using both together that needs to be sorted out a bit. And this also, the sampling bit and small area estimation modeling fits in this, like some of it's borrowing information, some of it's injecting noise, and all of it seems to be methodologically around getting the right amount to hide enough and learn enough at the same time. But sometimes they're kind of at cross purposes. So I wonder if you had any thoughts on this. We're talking about at least 3 different worlds here to combine, and I think it would be exciting to do so. But thoughts on this? It's like we're trying to preserve privacy and still learn, whereas the rest of the world is always trying to unlock everything. And we keep seeing, oh, look, I can identify 99% of the people with 5 data sets or something like that. So you're in an interesting position, and it's fine to say this is off the beaten path for this, but you're kind of pulling from 3 different areas, like you said, and you've got some partnerships with academia. I'm just interested in your thoughts on, you laid out your next steps and the feedback you'd like, but do you see benefit in sort of maintaining a foot in all of the camps here?
Well, so I don't know if Eloise or Kira want to jump in at all, but I think I believe, I don't want to speak totally for the Census Bureau here, but I believe our modus operandi a little bit is to roll out the differential privacy and formal privacy as we get to a point where we know how to do it and do it pretty well. Mm-hmm. And until that point, to kind of stick with more traditional methods, and synthetic data being one of those more modern of the traditional methods. And as you said, there are ways of making synthetic data differentially private as well. But again, all of that is regardless of the challenge that sample surveys provide specifically to differential privacy. And again, I'm speaking a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but I suspect with sample surveys getting to a point of differential privacy will likely mean sort of reimagining our collection process from the ground up. It's going to be, it's a super big challenge.
Yeah, thanks. I agree.
Are there other questions or comments from CSAC members? Yeah, Claire?
I'm just going to highlight something that John typed in. I guess we're both the sickies, so we can't quite vocalize this usually. He was talking about how synthetic data has several technical definitions. When used in disclosure limitation, it means that some or all of the released data are draws from a posterior predictive distribution estimated from the confidential data. In the DP literature, it means that the output of the DP mechanism has the same schema as the input confidential data. In some cases, the two definitions are equivalent. First instance, if the posterior distribution is estimated with differential privacy. So I guess to unpack that a little bit more for others, this is given a little bit in my research area. Some of the synthetic data models that you can use for protecting the data, if you can figure out what are those like key, like sufficient statistics, maybe based on those models, if you alter those with a differentially private mechanism, then you can generate this differentially private synthetic data from it. But to Gary's point, as sample survey weights, it's very difficult to figure out what is the sensitivity, or in the terms of differential private literature, the global sensitivity of that, and figure out how you could alter those kind of estimates. So it gets, again, there are some estimates that are much easier to figure out how to protect them. Why counts or tabular statistics are often seen in literature because we already know the answer. The global sensitivity is always 1, as long as they're disjoint counts. So that makes it really easy. But then once you move away from that to like even sums or maximum as a statistic, it gets really hard to protect that. So just trying to figure out that balance again of how much noise you could inject in to generate your synthetic data. Hopefully that clarifies a few things and not confusing things further.
Other questions or comments? So if not, it looks like, Tommy, we might be finishing a bit early for this session, and the next, we just go into committee deliberations. So I'll hand it back to you, Tommy Wright.
Tommy Wright, finishing early can be good. Thank you very much, Eloise, Gary, and Kira, as well as Claire, and the questions and discussion from the committee as well. Several things are about to happen now. We're going to take a 10-minute break. Most of us are going to go away. The committee is going to reconvene with Jay's leadership to formulate committee to formulate recommendations, to have committee discussions and formulate recommendations. I want to thank everybody for today's participation, and this meeting resumes promptly tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a very good rest of the day. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jay?
Yeah.
I wanted to say that, hi, Lance, that usually when I ask a question, I have a thought. Did you have a thought about your question that you had about whether or not you're in the sample or not? I believe that we say that knowledge of being in the sample is confidential, and we don't want to risk people knowing who's in the sample. Did you have a thought on your question there?
Well, I was wondering, when you're calculating some measure of disclosure risk, what do you assume you know about that case? So if you know that you're in the sample, if someone knows that someone's in the sample, then that's hugely disclosive. So obviously that should be confidential. But if they know that, then they have a chance to identify them. But if they have no idea who's in sample, a fair amount of protection just from the fact that there's a random sample, I would think.
Right.
That was all.
Right. Okay.
So
thank you. I'm going to let you go. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thanks, Tommy.